Okay, Chair, we're streaming live on YouTube, so I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much. Good morning and welcome to East Devon District Council's consultative meeting of the Housing Review Board on the 11th of October 2022. I am your Chair, Councillor Sarah Chamberlain. I would also like to welcome anyone watching the meeting via the live stream. I would like to remind both members and public attending or watching that this council has delegated much of its decision-taking power to senior officers until the 31st of October 2022. This is due to concerns relating to COVID risk. Consequently, this meeting is being held remotely and on a consultative basis only, but we will continue to adhere as closely as possible to the procedural rules detailed in our Constitution. The meeting can be viewed live online and will be recorded. Please bear this in mind throughout the meeting. Therefore, may I remind colleagues to be careful with their language and that the code of conduct applies throughout our meeting. We reserve the right to remove and disconnect any participant disrupting the meeting by whatever means. Please turn any telephone devices off or to silent. As this consultative Housing Review Board meeting is dependent on the internet connection and a power supply, in the event of a break in the internet connection or power cut, please bear with us as we try to reconnect. After 15 minutes, if we are not able to reconnect, we will consider the meeting adjourned and reconvene at a later date. Please check the committee page on our website for details. Please make sure all microphones are muted when you are not speaking and avoid any background noise levels. Please keep points short and do not repeat points that have already been made, and do not interrupt. If you wish to comment, please raise your electronic hand and wait to be called. All councillors have been sent the agenda for today's meeting. Any members of the public who want to view the agenda can do so by visiting our website, www.eastdevon.gov.uk. We will now start the meeting by doing a roll call of committee members here present. Can you please now unmute your microphone, and when you hear your name, please confirm by saying present. When you have confirmed you are present, please mute your microphone again. Over to Sue, please.
Thank you, Chair. So we'll start with yourself. So Councillor Chamberlain, please.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Hall. Councillor Taylor, please.
Present.
Thank you. Stephen Beer.
Present.
Thank you. Cindy Collier.
Can't make
Susan.
morning meetings, I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you. Sue Saunders, please.
Yes, present.
Thank you. Sarah Clark.
Present.
Thank you. And Rob Robinson, please.
Present.
Thank you. And I can confirm that we're quorate today, Chair.
Thank you, Sarah. That's brilliant. Agenda item 1 is public speaking. I believe we have Sue Saunders. Ian Hall is not here. We have Stephen Beer and also Steve Gazzard to speak. First of all, we'll go over to Sue Saunders, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to realise before I start that I'm bringing this to the board with the full backing of the tenant and leasehold tenant management group. Right. This is to do with the Property and Assets Complaints Policy. Officer Responsible Sophie Davis, authorised by Graham Baker in April 2021. This is version 2 of the policy. In what year was version 1 authorised? Item 2 of the policy states, why has the council introduced this policy? There is no mention of council involvement in setting it up. There is no evidence of approval being sought from the board on any HRB agendas going back to 2017. I would also dispute each of the 5 bullet points in item 2 of the policy. Item 3 is informal complaints. The Housing Ombudsman Code says a complaint must be defined as an expression of dissatisfaction, however made. The resident does not have to use the word complaint for it to be treated as such. My fellow tenants have found gaping holes in Ian Williams' computer programming. These flaws prevented tenants from feeding back their complaints about the deplorable service they received, and they would have gone undetected but for tenants. The inordinate amount of stress tenants have been under trying to get their problems dealt with meant that they had to turn to the only option available, the Informal Complaints procedure, and see what happens. Their complaints have been, and we assume are still being, recategorised as repair requests. Tenants have been labelled aggressive, and others persistent complainers. Behaviour has forced them to this by a total lack of consideration. Members of the Repairs and Maintenance Department make decisions to recategorise complaints as repair requests. How can this be done without bias? The policy is being employed at pre-stage 1 of the complaints procedure. The Housing Ombudsman's Code does not approve of extra named stages, which they term stage 0 or pre-complaint stage 1. Therefore, the Ombudsman's Code is stating that this type of interference in tenants' complaints is unacceptable. When a complaint is made, it must be acknowledged and logged within at stage 1, within 5 days of receipt. How long must tenants wait for acknowledgement when it goes through this pre-stage 1? I have voiced concerns about complaints being removed from the system and have asked for an investigation on several occasions, only to be assured by senior officers that the housing complaints procedure is part of the corporate complaint procedure. We will investigate the council's complaints procedure to see if non-tenant residents of East Devon also have their complaints filtered. We had not heard of this policy's existence until a couple of months ago. Now we hear they are talking about taking it out right across the housing service. This must not be permitted. There are so many aspects of this policy we distrust that we are demanding that it be scrapped immediately. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sue. Next, I have Stephen Beer to speak, please.
Good morning. Many residents in East Devon and Exmouth will be suffering this winter, and during this winter, they're worried about high bills, high energy bills. They're really suffering, and we want to know. I want to know, and many of our residents want to know: will all the community centres, churches, etc., will be opening doors for residents? And if any rent for the community centres needs to be paid for, would this be waived? This is well needed at this moment in time, a safe place, a warm place for all our residents and tenants to go to. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Next, we go over to Steve Gazzard, please.
Thank you, Chair, for allowing me to speak. Firstly, can I say thank you to Amy and Michelle for helping me with my queries in Exmouth. So my question is across the whole of East Devon. Could we please have an update in relationship to voids across East Devon? Because obviously we know that people are desperate for council accommodation. It would be helpful if we could have an update with the numbers and how Ian Williams is getting on in making these voids habitable for residents. So I'm just asking the board whether we could have an updated report, please.
Thank you very much, Steve. I'm sure we can. Next, we move on to agenda item 2, which is the appointment of the vice chair. I would like to invite nominations from the board for the position of the vice chair, please. Does anybody have any nominations?
I'm quite happy to stand again if nobody else wants, to do the job. So.
Okay, so we've got Sue put herself forward.
Nominating myself. Sorry.
That's all right. Anybody else want to put themselves forward for vice chair? Don't think I see anybody at the moment. Let me just check there's no raised hands for speakers. No, I don't have any other raised hands for speakers. So Sue, I will need...
Have you got a second?
Yeah. Would anybody like to second Sue being the vice chair? It needs to be somebody from the committee.
I'll second.
I'll second that.
Oh, there's everybody.
Sounds like you're in, Sue.
Take your pick with the second.
Okay, it was a bit Hobson's choice, but I'm still quite happy to stand. Thank you. I'd like others to take a chance, but there we are.
No, that's absolutely lovely. That's fine.
Thank you.
So I believe in agreement then with the people seconding. Then we had Steve, we had Sarah. That welcome Sue as vice chair again. Okay.
Sorry, I keep muting myself. Thank you.
That's all right, that's fine. I have John to speak.
Thanks, Chair. Just to pick up on those public speaking items, if I may, just very briefly. Of course, the first two are covered on our agenda today, so we can go into that in more detail. And Councillor Gazzard's question on voids is on our forward plan when you come to that in a minute, and we'll make sure that that report comes forward to future meeting of the board. Thanks, Chair.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, John. Yeah, I knew that it was on the winter housing plan and coming forward today as well, so I thought they'd be answers. That's brilliant. Thank you. Sarah, do you just need to record that vote for the vice chair and confirm the outcome?
Yes, you want me to run the votes for that?
If you want to, just
yes,
got
of
it all
course.
there properly. Yeah, thank you.
Of course, thank you. So if members could please use their green ticks to vote in favour, or red crosses to vote against, or raise your electronic hand, please, if you want to abstain from the vote. So we have 5 green ticks in favour, Chair.
Thank you very much. That's brilliant. Moving on to agenda item 3 is minutes of the previous meeting. If anyone wishes to comment on the set of minutes from the 16th of June 2022, please do this by raising your electronic hand. If I have no electronic hands raised, I'll take this as an indication that you all agree the minutes of the previous meeting. I shall just check. Let me just check. I have no blue hands, so thank you. The minutes of the previous meeting are agreed. Moving on to agenda item 4, apologies. Over to Sarah.
Thank you. So we have apologies from Councillor Parr, Councillor Pook, Sue Dawson and Kat Summers.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Sarah.
Sarah, I'm sorry to interrupt. So I did see a little notice come up from Cindy Collier saying that she was wrongly named as somebody else.
Yes, that has been corrected now, Sue.
It's been okay. Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Sue. Thank you, Sarah. So agenda item 5 are declarations of interest. This will be done by roll call. Over to Sue, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Councillor Chamberlain.
No declarations of interest, thank you.
Councillor Taylor.
None.
Stephen Beer.
None, Sue.
Cindy Collier.
Tenant, East Devon District Council.
Thank you. Sue Saunders.
Oh, sorry, Tenant of East Devon.
Okay. Sarah Clark.
None.
And Rob Robinson.
Private tenant in East Devon.
Thank you. Okay, back over to you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Sue. Moving on to agenda item 6, matters of urgency. There are none. Agenda item 7, confidential exempt items. There are no items which officer recommends should be dealt with in this way. Moving on to matters for decision, the agenda item 8, the forward plan. The forward plan will be presented by the Housing Service Lead, Amy. Over to Amy.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, boards. So you probably noticed with regards to us postponing this meeting that I did sneak a couple of extra reports onto your agenda today. One of those is the emergency winter housing plan. The other one was the tenant satisfaction measures. So apologies, but it seemed like an opportunity to bring them forward with the sort of extended timescales that we had. So obviously this is your opportunity as a board to put forward reports that you would like to see us bring to you. Picking up on Councillor Gazzard's suggestion, we can add a void report onto the agenda for the next board meeting. I've got 2 additional suggestions that I would like to put forward to you. The first one being the creation of a damp and mould policy. So linked to a lot of what we've been discussing recently, and as part of what Steve's just raised in terms of the cost of living crisis, we have got a report coming today on the winter housing plan. But one of the themes that teased out through that report is the situation that we have around damp and mould in our properties and exactly what we are doing about that. So damp and mould features highly with regards to themes around complaints and has done for some time. And the reality of the situation around the age of our stock is that we know many of our properties are in need of significant investment. We often have damp and mould problems attributing to a lot of this, and it's up there in terms of the responsive repairs requests that we received. Often they are focused around damp and mould. My view is that we need a very clear policy on this in terms of how we will deal with this to ensure that we have consistency across the board on that. We have at times in the past been quick to attribute this to what's known in the sector as lifestyle issues. I say we in the past because it's been a sector-wide issue where often some of these problems are attributed to lifestyle issues. But we've got to look at that through a different lens now, where we've got blocks of flats that are in need of significant investment, perhaps from a fabric perspective, as well as the need for heating upgrades. Tenants are going to find it increasingly difficult to manage day-to-day tasks such as drying, washing in properties like that. If you add into that the current cost of living crisis, where people will be paying more for their energy, the reality is that people won't be turning their heating systems on. That all creates a bit of a perfect storm for us. So we need to be very clear and very concise in how we will deal with this. And I believe that having a policy, a damp and mould policy, will be the best way to take that forward. And I suggest that we bring that back to the next meeting of the board for approval. So that was my first suggestion. I also would suggest now that we add onto the forward plan a retrofit plan. So as we're aware, we are needing to get our heads around the challenges ahead of us in terms of the investment in our own stock. We've talked a lot, and Joe's here today to talk to us about development and additional stock, but we've got to think very carefully about our current stock and what we're doing around retrofit and how we are going to make it efficient and fit for purpose moving forward. It's a massive task. We've touched upon it a few times at these board meetings over the past few years, as you would expect. What we need to now start doing is pinning down a plan for how we're actually going to approach this. We've got the stock condition data, the stock condition survey happening, as we know. Information is now starting to come back, but we do have a lot of other information on our stock currently. We can't stand still and wait for the next 18 months in terms of when we'll get all of that information back. We need to start moving forward on some of this now. So what I suggest is a good first step is we capture retrofit on the forward plan, and the officers and myself will start working out the best way of starting to move that forward. So you can expect a report on how, a scoping report and how we expect to do that on a future meeting of the board. And that is my second suggestion. Obviously, this is about you though, board. If you've got other suggestions that you want to put forward, then now is your opportunity.
Thank you very much, Amy. That's brilliant. So speakers, first of all, I have Sue Saunders to speak, please.
Yes, can I suggest we have a report about this pre-stage 1 policy, because it is very important to the tenants, and I would like it investigated, please.
Are you, is that in, Chair, sorry if I may, is that in relation to complaints, Sue?
Yes, yes. I mean, pre-stage 1 complaints is not acceptable to tenants.
So we've already got complaints on the forward plan.
Yeah.
So yes, suggest it stays there, and we can pick up on some of the points that you raised earlier when we come to this item today.
Yeah.
But yes, our situation around complaints and our position on complaints, we also have to look very carefully at some of the new legislation coming forward. That complaints are a key feature of the Social Housing Act that's coming in.
I'm aware of that.
We need to make sure that we're absolutely compliant with that. So that's part of the reason why we put it on the forward plan, to make sure that we do comply. So yes, so that's already on there. I suggest we capture that as part of that.
Yes, okay. Well, as long as it's discussed and voted on, then I'll be happy.
Sorry, thank you very much. Next, I have to speak. Oh, I have no more hands up for anybody to speak. So I believe this report is for noting. However, we the forward plan, Amy would like to add on the retrofit and the damp and mould policy and the voids going forward with the complaints. Are we happy to add those on to the forward plan, everybody?
Hi, Chair. I had my hand up.
It's not on. It was up and it went back down again. Do you want to speak, Steve?
Yeah, just a quick one, Chair, if I can. I think the damp and mould policy needs to come in now. We cannot wait for any more reports because of the energy crisis. This needs to be done now. I think, we cannot wait any longer. It needs to be sorted out now. All these written reports and everything takes a long time, and we are coming up to a very important part of the year where winter's coming in. It's going to be coldness, all the energy crisis we'll be talking about later on. Something needs to be done now. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. So I have no more hands up. Giles, am I correct in that we need to vote in the extra bits by the committee?
No, they've just added to the forward plan.
That's brilliant.
Exactly what it is.
Lovely. That's absolutely brilliant. So
yeah,
those, yeah.
If I may, can I just reply just quickly to Steve's point there?
Of course, yeah.
Steve, just to reassure you, we're obviously dealing with damp and mould cases all the time. We deal with them on an individual basis and make sure that we're trying to find the right solution and to support tenants with what they're dealing with, and for us to provide whatever help we can. So it's not a case of this policy that we're not doing anything at the moment. We are dealing with this day in, day out, but what the policy will do is just create that consistency across the board and be very clear with the commitments that we make in terms of how we will approach these cases. So I just wanted to reassure you on that we're not dealing with damp and mold. We deal with it all the time, but this policy will just give us a bit of structure around how we actually deal with it moving forward. I absolutely take your point. It's really, really important, and we'll come on to it when we talk about the emergency measures later on in the agenda. But every day that goes past in terms of the winter cost of living crisis is a day too late. So we do need to move very quickly on these, and we are already working this policy up now.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amy. That's brilliant. So they're all noted and they go onto the forward plan. So that's lovely. So now we move on to agenda item 9 is the plan for resident involvement strategy. And this is to receive a report from Yusuf, the interim housing service manager.
Thank you, Chair. I hope this works. I've had loads of problems with the Wi-Fi this morning, so I'm hoping that I can share my screen. I've jointly worked on this report and the presentation that I'm about to go through. So it's a joint presentation between myself and Sue Saunders, the Chair. of the resident involvement monitoring group. So I'll try and share my screen now, hopefully. Hope you can all see that. Yeah, okay. So this presentation obviously will cover the key aspects of the report. The report's within your pack, and the presentation outlines the process for the review of the resident involvement strategy, which is currently due for review. It'll set out the scope and the key considerations for the review and the approach we're about to take. So the purpose of the report that you had within your pack is for the Housing Review Board to consider and agree the scope of the review, the methodology, the objectives, and the timescales for the review. And we'll go through that in a bit. So the current involvement strategy was for a 3-year period between 2019 and 22. And as I said, it's up for review, and it was attached in Appendix A. It sets out our commitment to developing a number of ways in which tenants and leaseholders can get involved in the housing service, and how we consult with tenants on our estates, in our properties, how we involve them, and how they help us shape the service. It also sets out how we comply with the Homes and Communities Agency regulatory consumer standards that we're required to meet, and also the tenant involvement and empowerment standard, which sets out conditions and requirements around customer service, providing choices, how we handle complaints, how we involve people and empower them, and how we understand the diverse needs of all our tenants. So those are the key objectives of the previous resident involvement strategy and the current one that we're going to be producing and developing with residents. So some of the key considerations that we've outlined in the report. The first one is around what I've just mentioned, the Charter for Social Housing Tenants, that focuses on how we engage with customers and communities, how the regulation is going to change, how they're going to concentrate on consumer standards, and they could come out and inspect us as well, which hasn't happened in the past. How boards, the Housing Review Board, are expected to listen to residents, understand how they feel about the services being delivered, and how we consider and hear the voice of residents and act upon it. So that's crucial in the Social Housing White Paper. And also the Social Housing White Paper focuses particularly on health and safety, listening to residents, how we carry out repairs, complaints, and again, respecting the tenant voice. One of the other considerations we'll have to think about carefully in the review is around COVID and the outcomes of the pandemic, around how it affected community consultation, engagement and involvement, which was very limited during this period with the lockdowns, the closure of community centres, and social activities being put on hold. And some of the issues that emerged around food and fuel poverty, social isolation, and how we would support vulnerable tenants during that period, and how we need to support them going forward. And around the pandemic, people's behaviours changed as well, and there was different choices they made around how they wish to be involved, and they called it a new norm. It changed the way we might involve people going forward, how they want to be involved. So we need to think about that. And there was key issues around recruitment, in particular around the pandemic, where we struggled with filling vacancies, and we continue to do so, but it's improved considerably over the last few months. And last of all, the communities team is a key consideration, because they during lockdown, they weren't out and about. The community centres were closed, and we need to start re-engaging with communities. The Social Housing White Paper, as I said, it places greater expectations for us to consult, involve and empower residents. And we've started to strengthen the communities team, and recently have appointed an interim communities manager who's in place, and we're starting to fill the vacant posts so we can get out there and start consulting and empowering and involving residents, and also look at this review and the governance structure. Some of the key risks that are highlighted within the report are that we could, if we do not comply with some of the conditions that I've mentioned, we could fail to meet the regulators' expectations and legislation around consumer standards, the tenant involvement and empowerment standard, consumer regulation, and good governance and best practice around the governance arrangements we have, and in meeting the social housing white paper. Obviously, we get the service wrong, and we don't listen to tenants. You know, we could fail to provide services that are needed out there on the estates. But so it's important that residents, members and staff all work in partnership, and we can continue to improve the lives of all our residents. Now, that's a key aspect of the community involvement strategy. We need to make sure that staff members and resident groups are working together to scrutinise, shape and deliver the services. And that is going to be key to the community engagement strategy being successful. And it's important we remember that and when developing the strategy, and we make sure we get it right. I'm going to hand over to Sue, who's going to talk about the objectives of the review and strategy. So I don't know if I have to come out now, Chair.
I think Sue. Have we lost Sue?
Sue, I think you need to unmute yourself.
Yeah,
I was trying to, it wouldn't do it. Yes, right, thank you. Can I just come on one thing? I see on the beginning of the report that the risks involved in this strategy are low again. To my mind, the risks are high if we get it wrong. So it's a matter of getting it right, because there could be high risk involved if we get it wrong. Okay, so on to my bit. So I'm doing objectives and review of the review and strategy. Right, the objectives. E7 used to operate a housing service, but it no longer applies. It is now run as a housing business. Officers need to get back to the original concept of offering a service and to the realisation that tenants are East Devon's customers and not dependents. I believe the main objective for the new resident involvement strategy is to create a firm foundation on which to build a structure of inclusion, trust and accountability. Without accountability, there can be no trust. And without trust, we cannot expect to create an ethos of tenant inclusion. Given the necessary support and encouragement, total tenant inclusion could lead to a truly cohesive working partnership. This strategy is going to serve as a rule book for the tenants, for tenant involvement for the next 3 years, and we need to ensure that it is fit for purpose. We need to look to the future and create an informed and enlightened view of the changes which will face social housing during this 3-year period. Much as I deplore modern technology, I understand there is no getting away from it. I reluctantly accept that this modern form of communication does have its uses, as long as officers and staff accept that not everybody will have the necessary equipment or knowledge or inclination to use it. Remember, pen and paper does not rely on electricity. Whatever form communication takes, it has got to stand the test of time. But we must also be sure not to chuck the baby out with the bathwater. Not everything old is outdated, and not everything new proves, given time, to be an asset. Whilst I appreciate East Devon will be facing a great many difficulties in the coming year, I believe it is by getting back to basics and facing the challenges which lie ahead as part of a united housing service. This could prove the most effective method of dealing with problems as and when they arise. We need to meet problems head on with complete and utter confidence that we are working together and with the same goal in view. In this way, we can, bit by bit, show that a cohesive working partnership, East Devon is able to provide a service to be proud of. Methods of involvement have been discussed for as long as there has been tenant involvement. The only area which will truly benefit from future discussion is that concerning the use of modern technology. Given the speed and accessibility of communication via computer, iPads and smartphones, etc., we would be foolish to ignore this method in our effort to involve more tenants, especially younger tenants. Whilst the method of communication might interest younger tenants, I don't believe the subjects under discussion at housing meetings would be enticing for younger people. I suspect they would find the subjects dry and lacking in excitement. The advantage of recruiting older, more experienced tenants is the value they bring with their knowledge of workings and social history of housing. It is vital we recruit people who can bring common sense and practicality to the table when trying to resolve complex housing issues. Make no mistake, younger people would be very welcome if they wish to join us. Their view of housing naturally takes on a totally different image, but I'm just concerned that they would find the work boring and wouldn't stay the course. I think they would be better suited to more active and creative ideas of community tenant involvement. I suggest younger people might be interested in setting up digitally, oh God, can't even say it, operated groups specifically to deal with the requirements of teenagers and young families, i.e. community facilities aimed at young people dealing with drug and drink antisocial behaviour, perhaps setting up groups along the lines of Neighbourhood Watch. Another way for tenants to get involved is through local residents associations. Many issues discussed at these meetings are closely related to council properties and tenants. These meetings are an excellent way of alerting officers, etc., to the problems which concern various communities throughout East Devon. Unfortunately, as in other areas, they don't attract many people to their meetings. It might be worthwhile to encourage new tenants to come along to a meeting or prepare a leaflet itemising the various groups and their areas of influence, thereby giving new tenants an overview of what tenant involvement is all about. I also suggest that a similar leaflet is sent out with any letters or information going out to tenants from any of the housing departments. All in all, to succeed in building a sustainable strategy, it needs the full cooperation and combined effort of both tenants and the entire housing management staff. Okay, that's it. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Sue, and thank you very much, Yusuf.
Sorry, Chair, I just got a few more slides to go through.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, carry on.
Thank you, Sue, for your summary on that. So, the key objectives, just quickly summarising, it's about setting out our vision, making sure that there are different ways people can get involved and engage with us, and making sure we've got different ways that we listen to the resident voice and act upon it. Try to improve succession, which Sue talked about bringing new residents into the governance structure and the involvement structure, and making sure, quite importantly, that we're providing the right information, that it's comprehensive, so tenants are able to scrutinise service delivery, and making sure that it's understandable by residents. And the last bullet point on that slide talks about resilient communities. So that's making sure that we create plans and we consider what's needed by our tenants around health and well-being, community, environment and green spaces, around education, employment, life skills, financial well-being, around their home and access to transport and amenities, sustainability, and as we've talked about quite extensively already, resident involvement. I mean, part of the way we're going to start to gather this information is by carrying out a getting to know you, a tenant profiling exercise, where we'll find out about who our customers are, what their needs are, what their support needs are, what they're interested in, and loads of other information about what services we could provide to them. That way we can start to target these areas within our communities. In terms of reviewing and developing our new strategy, we'll ensure it obviously meets the social housing white paper and the standards. We need to make sure, as Sue pointed out, that we don't throw away all the fantastic stuff we're doing. There are a lot of tenants involved in the service currently, and we need to make sure we hold on to the things that are really working well, but improve the things that aren't working so well. We'll need to look at resources and budgets, and also look at how we support and train our tenants and what the terms of reference are for each group, making sure that there's no duplication, making sure that the terms of reference are correct and they are part of the structure, and they work and feed into how we improve our services. And also obviously consider what's out there, what are others doing in terms of best practice. I'm going to hand back over to Sue, who's going to talk a little bit about developing our new strategy and how we're going to consult with our groups who are in place at the moment.
Okay, right, so it's developing the new strategy. Most of the following groups, which I will be talking about in a moment, and panels, have been around, but perhaps under different titles, since tenant participation / involvement was first introduced so back in 2005, again following a government directive. As a founder member, I became a participant on the Tenant and Leaseholder Customer Panel, or TALC as it was then known. Meetings were held quarterly, involving reports from senior officers, department heads and tenants. Officers were questioned on various topics, and all decisions were made by the panel following a show of hands. Each vote was recorded. The newly formed Resident Involvement Management Group is based almost entirely on this original format. There's an old saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. We are still in the early stages of setting the ground rules for the group, but one thing is for sure, it is a tenant-run group, and we will not be swayed or influenced in any way by non-tenants. This group is at the heart of all tenant involvement and will be the repository for minutes from all tenant and officer meetings. We will insist that every meeting, whether tenant or officer, no matter how senior the officers may be, will have minutes taken by democratic service or an independent scribe and be brought to the panel for their analysis and input. The input will be taken back to the relevant meetings by the tenant representative. We insist that at least one tenant representative is part of every meeting within housing, tenant matters, tenant matters, where housing and tenant matters are being discussed. Transparency is vital, a vital part of the council's principles. I have been told that there are others, but I think transparency, democracy and communication are enough to be going on with. I spoke at length with the portfolio holder for these three principles during previous tenant-related issues, so I know how much importance is placed on these ideals. Some of the listed groups are no longer up and running. The Tenant Involvement Forum, defunct, now known as the Resident Involvement Management Group. JCAP is defunct, but we are looking to revive the tenant-led estate management service review group and the tenant-led supported people service review group. Tenant-led repairs and maintenance service group is still going. Tenant scrutiny panel, it needs to be rebuilt and desperately needs new members. Designated tenant complaint panel is struggling at the moment as it does not get the support it needs. A conference committee should be revived, and the tenant-led editorial group is struggling but needs new members and more cooperation from staff with regards to deadlines. Tenants residents associations, I'm not sure how many are still functioning. They have always been dependent on attendance, and most of the time people only turn out when there is a particularly grave issue affecting the community. Officers and staff, while officers and staff do attend tenant meetings, they see themselves mostly in the role of an authority figure. They set up agendas without reference to the tenant chair of the meeting and generally take over. They don't seem to understand that a great many panels, groups, etc., are in fact tenant-led. Tenant involvement training throughout the housing department, top to bottom, is definitely needed to help them understand and appreciate the role of the involved tenants. Non-involved tenants, this group appears to be a vast ocean of untapped involvement, but in fact, there are very few volunteers which ever emerge from its death. Some pop up for a while in the hope they can get their personal problems solved, but they don't stay long. Sorry. But they don't stay long. I'm not sure how much value officers and staff place on tenants group. It would appear that the only time they take notice is when tenants form a group and shout at them. This shouldn't be necessary. Rest assured, we understand we are under no illusions as to why we have suddenly become so important. I, for one, have read the contents of the white paper, and no officers are now in a panic trying to ensure all the boxes have been ticked. However, their compliance with the requirements of the Social Housing Regulator does not prove their acceptance of the idea of comprehensive working partnership. We, the tenants, are prepared to cooperate, but we are still waiting for proof of their willingness to join us. Right, thank you.
Thanks, Sue. So just wanted to talk a bit about communication. So it's really important that residents identify with the services we provide, and we clearly communicate with them around how we involve, consult and empower them. And hopefully this part of the services that we provide and how we involve residents should really enhance the reputation of housing and East Devon. And I just need to hand over to James Dillaburn, who's the senior designer, and Martin Milmore, head of document centres. We're just going to talk a bit about communication and identity. James,
Thank you. Yeah, I'll start first. Thanks, Yusuf. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Chair. I'll just do some quick introduction. So my name's Martin Milmore. I look after the document centres for Strata, who the shared service organisation partly owned by East Devon. Part of our remit at East Devon is to look after design services, and under that, James is our senior designer. So just a couple of points before I hand over to him. Firstly, this part of the presentation has been put forward to inform. No decisions are needed. So if you just sit back and enjoy, hopefully it's enlightening. Secondly, we're not talking about rebranding here. This is how we can help. Yusuf called us in quite early because he is aware we need to communicate this out in a cohesive, positive and engaging way. So Yusuf got us in early, started talking to us about what was going on, and then said he sees big value in how design and graphics and visual presentations can help bring this to life. So I'll hand over to James now. He'll give some background on what Strata and Design Service has done for East Devon in the past. He'll then do a bit around brand reputation, how that is linked to an individual's experience of an organisation. He's then going to do a couple of relevant case studies on how companies and organisations have used visual elements to support new strategies when they've sort of changed direction a bit. So hopefully that will be useful to you. And then at the end, there's a couple of little rough ideas on how this could work for East Devon. So I'll hand over to you now, James.
Thank you, Martin. So please, Chair, could I check first of all, is my screen sharing okay?
Yes, it is. It says hello.
Wonderful. That's great. Thank you very much. So good morning. My name is James Dillaburn. So we'll carry on with the presentation, and there's a little opportunity if there's any questions specifically on some of these design matters we'd like to ask just at the end. So bear with me as well. I'd like to apologise to you all too. We have a little bit of building noise going on in the background, so if you hear any hammering, etc., nothing to worry about, but do apologise. So what we'd like to do is just very quickly, there we go, let's make it full screen for everyone. There we go. So just wanted to share with you just a little bit about what the type of thing that we do is. So as you can see there in the top left corner, there's a little mention of the Cliffs Valley Regional Park, which is a new thing for East Devon. We recently helped the group here. It's an ongoing process. It's a really exciting opportunity here to build a new identity for this regional park. So we've talked about communication so far for us here, housing in East Devon. This is a nice example of creating a brand and a visual identity from scratch. The next little sample we want to show you here was a recent identity for the Ingrid Pollard exhibition at the Thelma Holbert Gallery from East Devon. This was a little piece of work we did, which was to bring across different touch points. So we're looking at digital, like Sue's been mentioning here, with also traditional media too. This was bringing together all these different formats into one kind of cohesive communication. Underneath it as well, you'll see the recent Watch This Space campaign run by the recycling service for East Devon. So this was a good example of using communication to really help residents of East Devon understand what was happening, a change, and also behavioural change needed too. And then on the right-hand side, this was a recent mail out which East Devon made. This was to help with the energy crisis here, information about how to save energy and save money. So this was some design work we did, which it reached every resident in East Devon. So this is just a few examples of the sort of work we do. As you can see, it's very much based around the residents. It's trying to help people to understand the messages that need to get out there. So the question for us is, well, how is this relevant to housing? Why, actually, we could say, do we need to communicate at all? So I'd like to share two characters with you all. So we have on screen two Freds. And the reason we're talking about this for a brief moment is to really just see the need to really be careful how we're communicating. So on the left, we have Fred Astaire. We probably all know who he is, American performer. On the right, we have another American performer, another Fred. This is Fred Durst, the rapper. So two Freds, they share a name. As you can see, they look rather different. You may know of either of these. You may not know them. You may just look at the photographs and instantly have an opinion of these two people. Perhaps you'd maybe want to have dinner with one and not the other. Well, that would be something for yourselves to kind of decide on. But the point is, we see there's two people here sharing a name, but they visually look very different. They may have a very different reputation as well. We've talked about that a little bit here. Simply by existing, these two people, well, they have a reputation, they have an image here. So we can see the need here for East Devon. With the housing service, it exists. It does engage with residents, with tenants here. So we have to control as best as we can do the identity and the way we communicate, because we communicate simply by being there. So how can we best do it? Here's a few other examples of identities and brands we may see out there. We're probably all familiar with these ones. We may get boxes from Amazon delivered on our doorstep. Maybe we have an opinion of that company. So of course, we might see an Amazon logo, but actually probably we're starting to think about that company itself if we see one of their boxes. FedEx, we may know what they do. Perhaps if FedEx are running late, well, we'd think that's a bit of a failure. So again, we might see a logo, but potentially we're thinking of their reputation. Apple, maybe some of us have iPhones, maybe some of us have opinions of this company. Perhaps we might think it's modern. We might think it's outrageously expensive. So again, we see a logo, but actually It's the reputations. It's the brand which comes to mind. And KFC, maybe we love it, maybe we hate it, but we certainly know what it is. The same thing with Coca-Cola. We see all of these brands in existence in our daily lives. We have an opinion of them. So the same thing applies to East Devon and the housing service, as we've been talking about so far. How can we make best use of the identity that we have inherently? So as Martin mentioned, we wanted to share with you a couple of case studies. So very briefly, looking here. So this is our first case study of Macmillan. We might be familiar with some of the work they do personally. We might not. It might just be that we've seen what they do out in the wild. Well, we want to share with you a repositioning of the Macmillan brand, which happened recently. So it was interesting that this identity we've seen in Macmillan, it's been around for a little while, but they actually changed their messaging, the messages they use and the way they talk quite recently. And the reason is that they were finding that people were concentrating a lot on the support that Macmillan was making to those specifically with end of life care. So what they wanted to do was really to encourage people who had cancer to live life as fully as they could, and to diversify the fundraisers that were getting involved with Macmillan, specifically reaching out to different age groups and different cultural backgrounds as well. So that's where this change of messaging came in. They wanted to challenge the perceptions of those who volunteered for and benefited from Macmillan as well. A big thing for them was actually accessibility and diversity as well. So all of these things were part of this repositioning of the brand. You notice as well, there's lots of words used with the Macmillan identity that we can see on screen at the minute. So tone of voice is a really important thing for them. We might see some of the relevance here for East Devon's housing service about tone of voice. Another great example is Shelter. Now, you may have seen recently they've had a bit of a rebrand. So we're focusing here on the identity which was used recently. So what was interesting about Shelter is that they were kind of victims of their own success, we could say, previously, because they came from a background of activism. And actually, the new brand goes back a little bit to those roots. But at this point in time, what they wanted to do was get away from the activism kind of roots that they had about getting people off the streets. And this identity, this brand, which was rolled out here, this was all about refocusing things on the quality of housing. So here you can see a little bit like Macmillan. We've got a few examples of that messaging up on screen here. How can you tie together something as diverse as a doormat, a piece of literature, a bag? Well, we can see visually it all knits together, and the genius move of the H of Shelter as the house there, it all ties things together really, really nicely. But you can see there, it was again, like Macmillan, all about the messaging. It was about being fresh and simple messaging. It was trying to wake up the public to the issues that the charity faced at the time. That's what this was all about. And you can see, of course, from Macmillan and Shelter, they both had a communication style. So what's the goal for us then? What's the goal for housing? Well, we can probably see the relevance, can't we, with those two case studies that we talked about. So here, as Sue and as Yusuf have been mentioning, is about simply communicating clearly. How can we best involve tenants as well? We have an identity, so how can we best take care of it? How can we best use the evidence that's going to be gained from the getting to know you profiling exercise that Yusuf made? How can we feed that then into the identity of the housing service here, and specifically about building communities as well? It's a really interesting proposition too. Here, East Devon has a housing service that's inherently invested in the area. It's not just about creating suitable housing, but building communities as well, improving well-being, offering chances for tenants to be involved. It's a really rich offering there. So to demonstrate this very, very briefly, and a little bit of a trivial way for you, we've wanted to show you a comparison. Let's say spot the difference. If we were to have a poster popped up, let's say on a cafe door there, East Devon District Council would love you to come to a fun event for the family. Let's say you saw this on a poster around the community. Would this really interest you? What would you also think about the identity of the people putting this poster up? Would you say that they're actually fun? Remember, they're offering a fun event. Would you say it's interesting and engaging? Does it tell you anything about them? Or is it a bit of a missed opportunity? So spot the difference. Maybe we could do something a little bit like Macmillan, what Shelter have been doing, just by thinking about maybe the tone of voice we have, maybe the images we use, perhaps the colors we use. Could perhaps we be looking for a way, maybe digitally on the left and posters on the right. And like Sue's been mentioning, kind of different touch points here, traditional media as well as digital media. How could we really just try to be as interesting as possible for the people we want to reach out to? And perhaps maybe a different audience here, as opposed to young people. Maybe we're looking for perhaps a more mature audience. How can we maybe, again, have that tone of voice we're after, but make something nice and engaging for our tenants? And perhaps about something about sustainability, maybe the environment. Well, again, we could see by using good imagery, a good tone of voice, good colors, perhaps, how could we just make things a little bit more successful? So at this point, we'd just like to ask really if anyone has any questions specifically on any of the design matters we've been talking here. And I'm just going to stop sharing my screen now.
Thank you ever so much for that presentation. Very informative. Does anybody have any questions they'd like to raise at this time? Councillor Steve Gazzard.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, can I say thank you for the presentation. I found it really, really interesting. My question is on the last part of the presentation regarding colours and that. Could you take on board that that obviously some people, and after declaring interest, I've got a visual impairment. Colours do make a great difference for people with visual impairments, and obviously as people do get older, their sight does deteriorate. So colours do make a great difference for those people that have those conditions.
Thank you very much, Councillor Gazzard. Good point there.
Thank you, Chair. May I
yes,
speak a moment, please? Thank you. I just want to say thank you, Councillor Gazzard. Absolutely right. It's very, very important that whatever work is undertaken, accessibility is really at the heart of it. Thank you for bringing that out. It's a very, very important point.
Thank you. Next, I have to speak Rob Robinson, please.
Sorry, mine's more for the previous. It's not really to do with this, but it's from the previous one when Sue did her presentation. So I'm happy to hold off for a bit. Is that a yay or nay?
I think you can bring it up now, Rob. That's fine.
Okay. All it was I often hear the little bits about sort of East Devon and housing, and I just need a bit of clarification. Is that based on people who are being supplied housing by East Devon, or does that also include people who are in private accommodation like myself, who it's the inability of getting I was unable to get a council house because of my situation, but does that include private residents, private renting? Are we included in all of that, what she spoke about?
Thank you, Rob. I don't know if Sue or Yusuf would like to come back on that one now.
Sue, would you like me to take that question?
Yeah, if you like, you Sue. I'll butt in if there's anything I want to say. Okay.
The community empowerment strategy, engagement strategy is around engaging our residents on the estate, which are predominantly tenants and leaseholders. Obviously, we do have freeholders living within our communities as well. And some of the services are often open to them as well, but it's predominantly tenants and leaseholders where we're engaging with, involving and empowering.
Can I just add to that? Hello? Yeah.
Yes, of course, Sue.
I'm getting an echo here. Sorry. Yeah, I'd just like to add that because resident associations, community associations are open to everybody who lives locally, and they can have a voice through that group, you know, and you're welcome there. They're always looking for new members. Okay.
Yeah, that's good. I just, you know, in my own situation, because of how it ever ended out, I had to go for private rental, but
Yeah.
it means we just feel like a forgotten margin. I do speak to private rented in a group situation, and we're all under the situation. We just feel that we don't know who to complain to, because sometimes our landlords don't listen and we don't have the backing of people. That was all. But I will be involved.
Thank you. We're now going to Sarah Clark, please.
On mute. It was on the overall strategy and the rebranding. Do we know, have we got a baseline where we are at the moment, and how are you going to measure whether this is being successful or not?
Shall I take that, Sue?
Yeah.
Yeah. So as part of the review, we're going to go back and talk to all of the groups that Sue outlined that are within the current structure. So, you know, the scrutiny group, the RIMG, we'll talk to Housing Review Board members. So we'll talk to all the existing groups and consult with them and find out how are they working at the moment, what things can we do better, are they receiving the support, are they receiving the right information, are they receiving the training, are their terms and reference correct, do we need to change anything? So we will be talking to all of the groups, including staff and tenants and not involved tenants as well. So it's a complete full review, starting from the beginning around, you know, who's involved, who do we want to be involved in future, and, you know, what do we need to do differently?
Right, and how? Oh, there seems to be some feedback. I'm sorry. How are you going to get the people that don't want to be involved but can be quite vocal?
I think we're going to talk to not involved tenants. So the people that you mentioned, we'll go out, we'll talk to them and try and find out why they don't want to be involved. Because, you know, quite rightly, some people don't want to be involved. They just want to live in their homes, but they do want to feed back on the services that they receive. So we need to find out which other ways they would like to feed back. It could be through individual workshops, it could be through satisfaction surveys, it could be through complaints, the complaint system, it could be through digital media that they want to respond. So I think we need to listen and find out how they wish to feed back, involve and influence the service, even though they don't want to be on formal groups.
Okay. Thank you.
Shall I move on, Chair?
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Just a reminder to all councillors and everybody in the meeting, if you can all stay on mute when you're not speaking, we shouldn't get quite so much feedback. Thank you.
I think, Chair, Amy's got a hand raised before I move on.
Yeah, Amy, that's fine if you want to come in.
So, Chair, I just wanted to check that Yusuf had actually finished his presentation, because I'm not sure he has.
No, I haven't. I've got a
No,
couple
they're
of
going
questions. If that's okay, I'll proceed. So in terms of the timescales for the review, I'm hoping you can see that slide. Hello?
Yes, we can see it, the time.
You can. So obviously the review will commence after the Housing Review Board have fed into the review today and made their observations, and we can then commence the review during October, November, through to creating a draft around December, January, looking at the design and how we're going to communicate it, and then bringing the draft strategy back to the Housing Review Board around March, April. And in terms of the project group, so the project group's made up of myself, Amy as the lead director, Sue Saunders, and the communities manager, Alex Higgins. We'll look to develop the strategy and make sure that we are reporting quarterly to the Resident Involvement Monitoring Group in terms of progress with implementing it. Once it's approved, we'll bring it back to the Housing Review Board every 6 months. We'll make sure that we test it for value for money and impact, making sure that we're making good use of funding, and making sure that we've got agreed performance indicators in place which measure the impact and value for money of the strategy. In terms of recommendations, the board are asked that the strategy is reviewed in line with the contents of this report and the feedback from today. So if you've got any feedback, we'll take that on board, and that the draft residents involvement strategy is brought back in March for adoption. So those are the recommendations for the board to approve, and I'll hand back to you if you've got any further questions.
Thank you very much. That's brilliant. Does anybody else have any more questions? Do we have Councillor Miller, please?
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, just for awareness, I'm not declaring an interest, but I'm just reporting to the review board that I've spoken with the monitoring officer because I'm employed by the Housing Ombudsman, but his advice to me is that that doesn't represent a DPI. So I just wanted to just make that clear first of all. It's a really, I mean, this is really welcome, this resident involvement strategy. I have only one very small comment, which is, and it's really just, it really is very minor in terms of language. I think it's on one of the pages in the draft strategy where it refers to the housing service believes customers' ideas make a difference. It's only my opinion, and others may disagree, but I've never really liked the term customer when it refers to tenants in the social rented sector, because I think when I think of the word customer, I think of going into a shop and buying goods and then going away again. I think if we really care about the tenants shaping our strategy, the tenants shaping their service, I think they're more than customers. You know, they are valued residents, which I think is actually, I think that's borne out throughout the report, but I think that language, language really matters. And my final point to Rob Robinson, who spoke earlier about the private rented sector, well, he's absolutely right that at the moment there's no recourse for private rented tenants. And he might be interested in looking at the government's plans for a private rented ombudsman, which will, for the first time, give tenants in the private rented sector proper recourse and the ability to hold their landlords to account. So I think, I think that's a really good bit of progress the government are making, actually, even though, I'm Labour and we've got a Conservative government, but it's something that we have to welcome. But yeah, great work on this from all the officers involved, and of course, Sue Saunders and all of the tenants who've been involved in this as well. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Miller. Next, I have Councillor Steve Gazzard to speak, please.
Thank you, Chair. Well, Councillor Paul Miller, yeah, I'm not happy with the word customer. I think we need to have a better word than customer in there, whether we say tenant or something else. But I would concur with what Councillor Paul Miller says. I welcome the report. I think it's very good. My own one of my reservations, and I'm always on about this, is that what we must make absolutely clear to all our tenants, or whatever word you're going to put in rather than customer, is that we seem to be really dependent on technology, and there's still a lot of people out there that don't want to use technology, or for various reasons can't use technology. We've got to assure people that hard copies are always available. So can we build that in somewhere, please? Because I think it's vitally important that in this day and age that people, if they want a hard copy, they can have a hard copy. And sometimes they get told, well, you can go online and download it. Well, that is, I don't think that is acceptable. I think we still should be providing hard copies if people wish to use them. And I think you'll probably get their response better than saying, well, you could do it online. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Gazzard. Next I have Amy.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just a couple of comments on this from me. Firstly, just to thank you, Seb, and to thank Sue and the other officers involved. I know a lot of work has gone into putting that together today for you. So thanks to them for that. I think this is really excellent timing for us. It's pretty fair to say that a lot of what was in the current strategy got derailed by COVID, and I know that we mustn't use that as an excuse, but it is the reality of the situation that we faced. So the timing on this is great. It's absolutely time to refresh this area of our service, and it's absolutely fundamental to everything that we do. And I just to pick up in some of the words that Sue said on her first slide, it really chimed with me, some of what you said, Sue, there in terms of working in partnership and how we do need to get this back on track. So I'm pleased to see, and I wasn't sure whether members would think we're taking quite a long time to do this, but I personally feel that through this scoping exercise that we're doing today, what we're doing is we are setting out a time frame where we can get good input on this and make sure that it's a strategy that sets us up for the future right. As we've mentioned, as Yusuf's mentioned over and over this morning, one of the key features of the new white paper stuff that's coming in is the involvement of tenants and how they're shaping our services. So it's absolutely fundamental that we get this right. So I'm pleased to see that we've got a nice long time scale where we can go out there, do a lot of consultation and make sure that we put in place a really good strategy that we can really live to. And I just wanted to say that because I think it's really important, and it's right that we put the time in now to get it right next year. So yeah, just thanks, and we look forward to taking that forward.
Thank you very much, Amy. Next, Sue Saunders, please.
Yeah, with regard to Paul Miller's remarks about customers, the only reason I used the word customer in my talk was to differentiate between a housing business and a housing service. And as a service, we are customers of that service. I'm not entirely happy with this. Seems to be so much disparity between, are we called tenants or are we called residents? I personally prefer tenants, but a lot of people find it demeaning to be called a tenant. I think, this is why we went over to residents, but it gets very confusing with residents and tenants. I personally would prefer to be called a tenant. At least people know where you stand, And with regard to Steve's talk about the need for officers to recognise the people who need something other than digital communication. I did raise that in my talk because it is important that they are not left out of communication, that they need that, So Yes, and all in all, I'm glad Amy wasn't upset by what I said, because she gets it straight from the shoulder where I'm concerned. I'm sorry.
Thank you very much, Sue. Next over to Jo, please.
Morning. Yeah, just a quick point about the sort of the confusion between what people might like to be called or might not like to be called. One of the things that we did in my previous place of work was that actually, because we had a similar issue, is that actually we balloted all of our tenants to ask them what their preference was, and it was quite interesting that everybody that lived within, or the vast majority of people that live within our general needs stock, voted to be called customers, and all of the tenants within our sheltered and supported schemes voted to be called clients. So it might be one of the things that you can do to start out with, Sue, is perhaps to canvass your fellow tenants to find out what people's preferences are. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jo. It's always interesting when you go out to do ballots like that, what actually comes back, isn't it? So no, that's really useful and brilliant. I don't believe I have any more speakers. I will just check. No, no more speakers. I'd just like to say, fantastic presentation. Thank you ever so much. And I think it's been a really interesting conversation that's been had around it, with points being brought forward and that. So Giles, if I'm correct, do we need to vote on this to go forward, or
No,
do we just...
the report chair is just for noting. So
yeah.
It's been debated. We move on to the next agenda item.
That's absolutely lovely. Always like to check just in case. So that's lovely. Thank you ever so much, everybody. So next we'll move on to agenda item 10, which is the update on the Housing Task and Finish Forum. And this is to receive a report from Jo Garbutt, the Housing Task Force Service Lead, and John Golding, the Strategic Lead, Housing, Health and Environment.
Good morning, everyone. Yeah, I'll try and keep it brief because I'm aware we're knocking on there with timing. This is an update, and just as a point of clarification, the Housing Task and Finish Forum is now complete, and the Housing Task Force was brought into effect as a result of that. So this is actually an update for the Housing Task Force, not the Task and Finish Forum. So it's just semantics, but just so that people are aware. So as I've just alluded to, there was a Housing Task and Finish Forum. And as a result of that, there was a clear message that came through that there was a desire to increase our social housing provision and also to maximise our assets. So the team went live at the middle of February, but at that point the team consisted of just two, so myself and Melissa. We've been suffering with the same issues with recruitment as the rest of the organisation, so we are still 2 posts down on the full team, but we have now got our development surveyor on board, albeit currently only 2 days a week, but that's a huge step forward. Our focus has been to date on maximising the use of our own land and our own assets. So that has been things like garage sites, infill sites. We're out there doing lots of site scoping, etc. We're also exploring lots of other options, including open market sites that might be available. And also I've been having a significant number of discussions around asset transfers as part of the One Public Estate. So that is where other members of the public estate, so maybe police, NHS, that sort of thing, schools, actually swap assets between them for the benefit of each other. So I've been in discussion with both DCC and the NHS about potential opportunities to develop on sites that are currently theirs. So that's been really interesting. We've also been starting to scope out this idea of trying to sort of recycle, she says in inverted commas, land that is currently owned by the wider EDDC portfolio that is up for disposal. So that might be things like toilet blocks that are up for disposal, ex-office buildings, perhaps depots, that sort of stuff. So we're just starting to look at the potential of us taking over one of the closed toilet blocks to look at that, to see if that's a potential. So lots and lots of stuff for us to look at. The other side of what we're doing is we're really trying to foster and build the relationships with our RP partners. Our registered provider partners are the absolute backbone of our delivery programme for the affordable housing. So one of the things that we're keen not to do is set ourselves up in competition with our RP partners, because we rely on them massively to meet the sort of numbers that we actually require to get in order to assist our waiting lists, etc. So working on that, I've also been working quite closely with Homes England about funding opportunities. And as I was saying, now that we've got our development surveyor on board, we're going to start doing a proper programme of the reviewing all our garage sites. There are numerous different ways now of doing groundworks, etc., which I hope will mean that we can develop on some of the garage sites that were previously not able to be built on because they've got perhaps mains drainage underneath them, etc. New build methods mean that actually that is no longer an exclusion to us being able to build over those sites. So that's really exciting. The main thing that I wanted to talk to you about today really is because I've got a recommendation at the end of this report. So the main thing that I wanted to talk to you about is that we have been exploring 3 potential development sites within Honiton. They are garage sites currently, very, very underused currently. A lot of them don't have leaseholders or tenants that actually hold those garages. They're becoming a bit of an eyesore. So had a look at these 3 garage sites and we believe that they have development potential. So we have been working with a company called ZPods in trying to do some initial investigations as to whether these sites might be suitable for additional housing units. Now, as an update to this report, since this was written, I have since had clarification from ZPods that those sites are in fact suitable for the type of development that we would like to do there. So that's a real positive. And the construction method that we're hoping to use is something called volumetric MMC. So that's a very complicated way of saying that these are factory built homes. There are a huge number of advantages to using this building method, all of which are outlined in the report, but I will just go through a few of the high level ones for us. One of the main ones is that extremely high quality buildings, very, very well insulated with very, very little wastage. It turns out through research that for every 10 homes built in standard construction, 1 entire home ends up in a skip, which, as you can imagine, is a huge amount of wastage. This build method is very, very low carbon impact. The homes are carbon reduced in their delivery and also in the management of them. So we would greatly reduce the heating bills, etc., for any tenants living within them. It massively reduces the impact on the local community where these homes would be being installed, because the time on site is much, much less than it would be in a standard construction. So there are many things that are in favour of this. One of the other ones that would pay long-term dividends for us, and particularly why we're looking at ZPods, is that they use particular components such as windows, external cladding, that sort of thing, which have a really long life cycle. So therefore we would be reducing the incumbent maintenance costs for the council in an ongoing basis. So what I'm asking for as a what's the word I'm looking for here, as a recommendation, is now that we know that the sites that we have earmarked for these have potential, we now need to go through a sort of procurement process which will take us up to something called the end of stage 0. Now, the end of stage 0 is where we will then be furnished with plans for the sites, costs for the sites, complete scoping of the scheme. And it's at that point that we would then come back to Cabinet to ask for approval to move forward and for the budget to be allocated to the development. So what I'm asking for today, which I think I'd like to clarify, and just check with Giles that we get the wording right. I think I might need to clarify the recommendation where I have asked for myself to be given the required approvals to undertake negotiations in the procurement process. I think what I'd like to clarify that too, if I may, Giles, is up to the end of stage 0, so that I can basically bring this forward up to the end of stage 0, where we can then take it forward to HRB and Cabinet for the actual scheme to be approved. Until we get to the end of stage 0, we don't have any of that information in order to be able to make an informed decision. Giles, do you think that makes sense as a recommendation?
Well, as I see it at the moment, the recommendation is there. It gives you the opportunity to scope the works that you want to do in negotiation with ZPods. So you get an understanding of where the project might go. But at that point, then, of course, you would have to go out to procuring a contract to develop. So I think it does. I mean, the recommendation there is limited to that point, I think, anyway. I think once you get to that point, you will have to come back and get further either delegated authority or further approval from Cabinet or and Council to move the project forward at that point anyway. Right,
because we're doing a single point, we're doing a direct award to ZPods. So does
well,
that...
I haven't seen. I mean, without having seen what that involves, I can't really comment on how that's being procured, whether it's being procured within the.
Yeah, via one of our frameworks. So we will be working
right.
via our framework. So it's already been through a full due diligence process. They've already successfully passed all the value for money things, etc. So what we need to be able to do now to expedite this as quickly as possible is to be able to, for myself and John, to be able to take this through to the end of stage 0, so that we have the facts and figures in front of us in order to be able to make a decision. Up until the end of stage 0, we won't have any of those facts and figures. Shall we take this offline? So if I just accept questions and then we take this offline and discuss.
Why don't you have some? If there are any questions, let me have a think about it for the moment, and then I'll come back and see whether we need to actually redraft the recommendation.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay. I did actually email Henry and Anita and John, I believe, about this to say that, just to clarify that was what I was seeking, because actually when I reread it, it isn't as clear as I would like it to be. So any assistance would be hugely appreciated, Giles. Thank you.
John, have you got any? John, what are your thoughts on this?
I think all we are asking permission for is to undertake some further feasibility exercises. We need to come back to the board and cabinet ultimately with site-specific details and costs. But it is just to do that further feasibility work as I see it.
Which I see is that's what the recommendation is asking for. You get to that point, then you have to come back to get your further delegations and authority to move the project forward. So I think actually the recommendation is
appropriate.
Is appropriate as it is at the moment.
Okay.
As long as you understand that, you get to that point 0, then you have to come back.
Yes, absolutely. That's what I want to do anyway.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I understand it's difficult at the moment because it's basically you don't know how long the piece of string is going to be. But I mean, fundamentally, I think that's what the recommendation, as I see it, is asking for at the moment, is to get to that point. Then you have to come back and seek your further delegation or authority to move the project forward.
Brilliant, lovely. Thank you, Giles. That's really helpful. So that really is what I was hoping for today, is for members of the board to recommend to Cabinet that I be allowed to move forward with the procurement and negotiations up to the point at which we can make a formal decision on whether we move forward with it and whether the budget is allocated for that development. So that's about all I want to cover, really, Sarah. Chair, if that's all right. So open to any questions. It was a very brief, so.
That's all right. Thank you very much, Jo. That's lovely. So now we'll move on to questions from anybody. First of all, I have Councillor Miller to speak, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good to see those procedural issues being ironed through. Big well done to Jo Garth for all the work she's done on this, because it's a really, as I think we've probably heard through the report, it's complex work, and it's really good to see the Z pods sort of coming to fruition. I have a question, and I apologise in advance if this takes us slightly away from the immediate recommendations in this meeting, but it's to Jo, and it's whether, on top of obviously what we're looking at on our land, has Jo considered in the longer term our ability to use compulsory purchase powers to acquire land for the purpose of delivering social housing? Is it within our strategy currently for the housing task force or not? So anyway, I'll hand back over to you, Chair, and to Jo if she can answer that.
Yeah, if I may, Chair.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, obviously compulsory purchase is always a sort of a last ditch attempt. But certainly as we come on to, because obviously, as you know, we're going through the stock condition survey at the moment. What we're expecting to come out of that is that a proportion of our housing stock may well not be able to be economically retrofitted to make it fit for purpose. So if there is a package of housing that needs to be razed to the ground in order to be redeveloped, and in the midst of that, say, street or estate or something, there are a few homes that have been sold via right to buy, then we would certainly approach those homeowners to see if, firstly, they would like to sell the homes back to us. But yes, we could find ourselves in a rare occasion when we might have to go down the compulsory purchase order. But as I say, that's always a last ditch attempt. There would always be negotiations before that to try and bring the homes back into the envelope without having to take legal recourse for that.
Thank you. Well understood. I appreciate, Chair. Compulsory purchase orders are my hobby horse at the moment, so you'll see me asking questions about it in various meetings as I try to find out more about it. Anyway, thanks very much.
No worries.
Thank you, Councillor Miller. Thank you, Joe. So next on the list to speak, I have Sarah, please. Sarah Clark.
Oh, hi. It's more for clarification for me. You mentioned Southwest Procurement Alliance.
Yes.
Is that the East Devon? Because I thought these were garages that were on our land. So
yeah, the garages are on our lands, but Southwest Procurement Alliance are one of the procurement frameworks that we subscribe to, and they help us with our procurement of many sorts of different contracts. It really speeds up the process for us. It offers a significant amount of due diligence work, etc. for us. So the reason that we are able to do a direct award to ZPod and still remain compliant with all the procurement rules are because we pay to be a part of the Southwest Procurement Alliance, and they do a lot of that backroom work for us.
Okay, so the money that is being used to procure the land is actually just going back into public coffers, if you like.
Yeah, there is no money changing hands for the land.
Okay.
Already within EDDC. In fact, it's already within the housing revenue account.
Okay.
Ownership. So that's why we can move a little bit quicker with it, because there's none of those land issues to contend with.
Brilliant. Okay. The other one was, these are houses for rent.
They are.
Are they ever, or is there a way? Oh, I suppose there's no way that you can say it would always be this case, because it depends on what happens with central government, but they won't fall into a right to buy.
They will.
They will.
Yeah. Yeah, the only way that we can exempt ourselves from right to buy is to make them sheltered schemes, because those are social housing in perpetuity. But other than that, everything else, I'm afraid, is up for, under the scheme of right to buy.
Okay. Well, that's unfortunate, but
it is, isn't it? Yeah, it really is.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. But I think it's brilliant work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jo and Sarah. Next, I have Councillor Taylor to speak, please.
Thank you, Sarah. I just wanted to say I think that it was an excellent presentation from Jo. I think this is the most positive thing that has come out the whole of this meeting that's gone on for nearly 2 hours, and I do hope that it'll go forward. And a bit like Paul Miller regarding the right to buy, I think we've lost so many wonderful homes that are now far out of reach of anyone's budget now. So let's hope that this will be a good opportunity to replace some of those homes. Thank you.
This is just the beginning, Brenda.
Yeah.
Just the beginning.
Thank you very much, Councillor Taylor. Next, I have to speak Councillor Arnott, please.
Thank you, Chair, very much. And yes, forgive me, I was in 2 other meetings before this, so I don't know what the other 2 hours has been like, but I came in exactly on the big ticket item. Jo, thank you so much for reporting on these ZPods. I know it's been in gestation for quite some time, and you and Megan and Dan in particular have been thinking this through. Perhaps after a slightly tiring meeting and following on from Councillor Taylor, really, I just want to emphasise this is potentially a huge moment. If we can make these work, it has the capacity to, in relatively short order, provide for a substantial amount of our housing need, which, as we all acknowledge, is in many ways in a crisis situation in terms of what's out there. So, you know, just Godspeed, fair wind in your sails, and whatever else people say. and let's get these done. It's fantastic, and we've I don't know if people have seen the ones that Mid Devon have been involved in already, but you know it is very exciting. I don't think it's right to compare them to the post-war prefabs, but I can't help but observe that where I used to live until about 22 years ago in South London, there was some post-war prefabs still standing and much loved and doing incredibly well. And so, you know, if this is what we need to do on the available land we can find, then let's get it done. And well done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Arnott. So I have no more speakers to speak, so that means I will go over to Giles just to run through the recommendation.
Thank you, Chair. So the recommendation is that the Housing Review Board recommends to Cabinet that approval be given for the Housing Task Force Service Lead to complete discussions with the South West Procurement Alliance and ZPODs for the purpose of procuring a contract to develop new housing on behalf of EDDC.
Thank you, Giles. Are we going to do the green ticks and the red crosses for that to go through? Sarah?
Yes, I can run the vote, yes.
Lovely, thank you.
So I think everyone knows the drill. If you could please, use your green tickets to vote in favour, green ticks to vote in favour, red crosses to vote against, or raise your electronic hand to abstain. So, Chair, we have 7 green ticks in favour.
That's fantastic, excellent. That's that carried. Next, we go over to agenda item 11, which is the emergency winter housing plan. And this is to receive a report from Yusuf, the interim housing service manager. Over to you, Yusuf.
Chair, if I may, I'm going to take this one. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you. Okay, so this report has been prepared as part of the work we are doing in relation to the Council's wider poverty strategy, as well as the more recent urgency that's been placed on the topic. Members may be aware of a report that John Golding, our strategic lead, took to Cabinet titled East Devon Winter Pressures Plan. It's fair to say that we're becoming increasingly concerned about the situations that some of our tenants are facing as we go into winter from a cost of living perspective. And what we wanted to do here is look at some practical measures that we can take to support our tenants through that. There are some quick wins here, as you'll see, and members might be familiar with the Warm Spaces initiative, which Steve helpfully mentioned at the beginning of the meeting. This is something that government have backed, and it's about opening public spaces as places for people to keep warm in. And you will see as part of this report that we absolutely are suggesting that we use some of our community centres for this purpose. There's a suggestion of work in the report around work that we can do to help with people's financial resilience, which is going to be really important. So we're talking about things like drop-in sessions, financial MOTs that we can do with people to look at things like maybe ensuring people are receiving all the benefits that they're entitled to, but also getting access to hardship funds. Many energy companies have set up hardship funds. They're not always easy to access, and we're finding officers are having to spend a bit of time going through those sort of things with residents. So we want to up all that sort of work in this area to make sure that we can best prepare people as we go into winter. We've suggested in the report that we designate specific resource to help push this, and we're proposing to do this via savings that already exist excuse me, in relation to some of the vacancies that we've already got in the housing service, so we can cover the cost of that. One of the main parts that I'm recommending to you is that we designate a fund of £50,000 within the HRA that we are able to access directly to help tenants. And this might be through support with one-off purchases that they need to make, or it might be to help with the cost of energy bills. Obviously, this is going to need a clear set of qualifying criteria in order for us to ensure we run this alongside support that's already in place from the council. But yeah, so we know that exists already. So we've got to work up this scheme to complement what already exists, is what I'm trying to say. You'll note, members, that some of this reporting basis is vague. That's because we are literally working on this as I speak. So we know that there's quite a lot of further work to do on this to clarify some of that. We've already taken the opportunity to hold quite a focused session with residents on this already. So we took some residents that aren't involved in the service already, and we took some residents that are already involved, and they're on some of those groups that we talked about earlier. And what I've done in the report, as you can see in section 2.3, is that we've sort of summarised some of the suggestions that have come forward from tenants themselves about what they would like us to do to help them. There's some really excellent suggestions in there. You'll see the mention of a one-off special version of our Housing Matters magazine. So that's something that we do 4 times a year anyway. But what residents said to us is that an actual magazine just full of information, ideas, tips, suggestions of places people can go, support people can access, that would be something that they would really value. So we've already started on working on that, and we hope to get it out as soon as we can over the next couple of months. I've suggested here that the housing leadership team monitor this closely, and I've put in the recommendation something about delegated authority, because what we haven't got clarity on right now is the actual detail of that scheme in terms of the criteria for being able to apply to the hardship fund. So I'm suggesting that delegated authority is given via our strategic lead. So once we have that in place, we can get that approval, and then we can get moving with it, because we don't want to wait on this. We need to get on with it pretty quickly. I'll pause there for questions, Chair, if I may.
Absolutely, Amy, thank you very much. So first of all, Councillor Miller, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to, another hobby horse I have, the Town Hall in Exmouth that I'm currently in, currently empty. Currently a very potential warm space for people to access, and I know the bullet point actually at 2.3, which actually specifically mentions parish halls as a place where hot drinks, warm places and snacks should be provided. I presume then in all of the parish halls where the town and parish councils are, and the rest of the district will be using those, but presumably the current position of Exmouth Town remaining closed will mean that won't be available, which I think is a significant injustice for the people of Exmouth. In the bullet point above, we see the fact that there's a hardship telephone number. And by the way, I mean, this whole report is completely welcome, and a big thank you to all the officers for this. And obviously it's important to have a hardship telephone number, but there are residents, as I think has been mentioned in previous meetings, that are digitally excluded. I know one who sadly, one of our tenants in council housing tenants who doesn't have a telephone, and before the pandemic was used to just coming to the town hall to report his problems. In fact, whilst the town hall doors were briefly open for the signing of the book of condolence for the late Queen, I sort of, whilst I was signing it, I was quite amused how there was a very elderly tenant that came in and just started complaining about her service through our housing repair service, and it was clear to me that she had no other means of contacting the council. So once again, you know, she was clearly in hardship, and she couldn't access us. So as well as those hardship telephone numbers, I mean, if the town hall, for example, in Exmouth isn't to be open, are we able to get officers roving around into our community spaces, such as community halls, to be able to speak with residents who perhaps, and I appreciate it's going to be a very small number of residents that don't have access to telephones, but even so, who will be able to speak to residents in that situation. And of course, as well, you know, we have to consider that people who are using the hardship telephone numbers might be in a very cold home at the time, and it might be a very uncomfortable experience for them to be contacting the council. And in my view, we should be bringing them into a warm space to have those face-to-face meetings with our officers. So absolutely welcome these plans, and wish all the best to our officers in terms of delivering them. but obviously from a perspective as an Exmouth member, I do believe there are improvements for the residents I support and represent. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Miller. Next, moving over to Councillor Gazzard, please.
Thank you, Chair. Can I say that I really welcome the report that Amy's put before us today. We are in a real emergency. There's no doubt about it whatsoever. And I'm sure there's many of our tenants who today or last night didn't put their heating on. And although the sun is shining, it is cold and it's going to get worse. Like Councillor Miller, I'll make no apologies. I think an ideal place that we could use is Exmouth Town Hall. There is no excuse whatsoever why that building cannot be open. It would be a really large, warm space for people to come to have coffee and tea and to chat to people. And I know we're looking at community halls as well, but I really think if we do not open that town hall in Exmouth this winter, we are going to be absolutely inundated with criticism. And I'm sorry, but I'm really passionate about that building being open. And I think this is the ideal time that it should be open. But I really welcome the plan that is before us, because, as I said, we are now, the emergency has already started, and we've got to grab it by the horns, and we've got to be there to assist people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Gazzard. Next, we move over to Stephen Beer, please.
Thank you. I won't be sacked. I'm sorry about this. The call for support to ensure that key public buildings can keep their doors open, as organisations across the country are being confronted with vast increases in energy bills. Energy bills rising from 1.5 million to 7.5 million is increasing nearly every day. Public spaces such as community centres, churches, art galleries, libraries could be used. Central government should provide councils such as Exmouth and East Devon funding for this to happen. Please, open our community centres, but also open Exmouth Town Hall. This is well needed. This is central. Please act now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Next, I have Rob to speak, please.
Hi. Yeah, I did put it in the chat thing, but is there an opportunity for the social resilience dashboard available for us to use as a panel or for further decisions? With that.
Thank you, Rob. I don't know whether that can be answered for you now or not. Amy, John?
Chair, I can answer that. So the social resilience dashboard is I call it our poverty dashboard. We report that regularly to our poverty working panel. We can make that available to Housing Review Board. It provides a snapshot. So again, we could add that to the forward plan if the board wish.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you. That's great news.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Next, we have Sue Saunders, please.
Yeah, going back to the magazine that's going out, I'm a bit annoyed that the editorial group were not involved in this decision, seeing as that we're the ones who get the magazine out. And also, I've had discussions with, can't remember her name, but one of the administrative officers, and I've said, you know, that it oughtn't to be all doom and gloom. It will be a Christmas edition of our magazine. It ought to include the spirit of Christmas as well within all the doom and gloom. So it can be a combined magazine, but I'm a bit cross that we weren't considered to be consulted as editors of that magazine. So that was one thing. Plus, I don't think it's only Exmouth Town Hall that's affected by being closed. I think it's town halls in general across East Devon. I'm pretty sure anyway. I wouldn't swear to that, but they are municipal buildings paid for out of the council, taxes. So they should be open for available for residents of the area. All municipal buildings. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much, Sue. Next, moving over to Councillor Armstrong, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm just following on from Councillor Gazzard's comment about the use of the town hall, and I'm just wondering what the process is for making sure that if it's agreed that should happen, what's the process for making sure that happens? Because he is the mayor of Exmouth after all, and I would have thought that. And I don't know, I'm really asking in ignorance here. I would have thought that as Mayor of Exmouth, he can push that and get the town council to agree it, or does it actually come back to East Devon because it's an East Devon property? So I'm not sure what the process is, but as Mayor, I would have thought that he's got an ideal opportunity to push this as much as he can, basically, and to get it sorted in his capacity. So that's all I'm asking. I'm just asking what is the process and what can the mayor do, the mayor of Exmouth, who's asking for this, what can he do about it so that it doesn't always have to come back to housing to sort it out, basically. But I might be well off beam here, Chair, so I just need somebody to clarify that. John might be the person to do it, I don't know. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Armstrong. I believe that Councillor Gazzard is eagerly off of mute, waiting to answer your question for you.
Thank you.
Can I firstly clarify that I'm not here as the mayor, I'm here as an East Devon district
No, but
councillor.
you are the mayor.
Yeah.
But you are the mayor.
I am the mayor, but I'm not representing as the mayor here. Yes, in my position, I have tried to get the building open at Exmouth Town Hall, but it is an East Devon district council building. We only rent certain offices off the district council. So at the end of the day, the opening of the town hall is a district council decision that they have to make. So yes, I have been banging on about it, Megan, but I'm if you like, my hands are tied by what the district council want to do.
Right. So can I come back, Chair?
Yeah. Yes, you can.
Yeah, I understand that, but what can you do? Have you actually written to anybody, or do you intend to, or do you just talk to us at this meeting about it? I mean, I'm just wondering what the process is. You know,
No, I've raised at cabinet, I've raised at full council about the town hall being open several times, as I'm sure other members here that have attended those meetings will verify.
But have you followed it up after the meeting? Sorry, I'm being a bit cheeky here. I know I'm being a bit cheeky. Just to get hold of an officer and say what's happening. I mean, you know, that's it's one thing talking about it at a meeting, but it's got to be action, doesn't
yes,
it?
we've put our request in writing.
Oh, good. Thank you, Steve.
I think at this point it would be a good idea to go over to John or even Amy. Amy has her hand up to speak. Whether they can clarify how we can actually get this moved forward and who needs to start that process within the district.
So, Chair, this report is about what housing can do, what's within our control, within our resources. There has been a debate elsewhere on the town hall. This is primarily about warm banks or warm spaces, and what we're putting forward to the board is, if you wish, we can open our community centres. That requires quite a lot of support and arrangements. We're not in a position to dictate or influence the use of the town hall, which is an office after all, and there are all sorts of issues that need to be considered on that. So this report just gives a range of things as suggestions as to what housing can do to support our tenants in what we're all seeing the impact of the cost of living crisis, which we anticipate will get worse, and the resources that we can control and influence in terms of our own assets that housing effectively look after. And if the board support this range of ideas, then that will go to cabinet for ultimate sort of final decision. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, John. Over to Amy next, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was just going to sort of say the same as John, really, that this report is just about what we have influence over, which is housing. And I can feel that, you know, there's a strength of feeling around, there is a desire around wanting to open the community centres. So that's great. And that's, as we've set out in the report, something that we are looking to do. Just a couple of points of clarity also on some of the other comments that have been made. Councillor Miller referred to 2.3. Just to be clear, Councillor Miller, these are not, this is just a summary of suggestions that were made by residents. So we're not necessarily going to be putting all of these in place, but it was just to give the board a flavour for some of the ideas that residents had. So you referred to the hardship phone number. That was one suggestion that came from them. We'll look at it, we'll see what we can do. But just to say that we're not proposing 2.3, those measures in 2.3 all come in place. So yeah, just to clarify that. And also just to respond to Sue's points around the magazine, I take on board your points. It shouldn't all be doom and gloom. You're absolutely right. It will be a Christmas edition. And I apologise that the editorial panel, if they weren't informed, if you weren't informed on that, because I was under the impression that a discussion had been had and that it had been perceived very positively that we should pack the edition full of this sort of stuff. So I do apologise on that. And it's still in, it's not finalised yet. It's still in process. So we will, of course, make sure that the editorial panel are involved in the sign off of that edition. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Amy. Last speaker I have, Councillor Miller.
Well, thanks for letting me back, Chair. I just wanted to clarify a little bit why I raised the town hall, because I don't want officers to feel like I've tried to sort of hijack what these proposals are doing. I think obviously that this board should be voting through these things. I think what I was trying to suggest is that if this housing review board, and particularly the tenants representatives on it, feel strongly, as I think Sue and Steve Beer have indicated that they do, that they feel the town hall should be open as a warm space. And I would slightly disagree. There are offices, but you do have a chamber here that I'm in at the moment that is just not being used really that much at all. I just feel as though those views, if this board have views on it, this report is being recommended to cabinet. And I think it's well within the purview of this board and the tenants on it to recommend to cabinet that it's the view of the tenants and the councillors on this board that they should further look at the reopening of the town hall. I think it's personally, I think it's a no-brainer to be doing that. And the one final thing I wanted to mention was there was one question that I didn't have answered. I do respect there's been a lot of comments made, so I can understand why. But it was just that with these communities, it would give me some comfort, given the town hall being closed, if where these warm spaces are being opened, particularly in the community centres that we own, and it's a question to Amy really, will there be any potential for housing officers potentially, and again maybe a question for John or somebody else, or financial hardship officers to actually be there, even if it's just for a little bit, to be able to answer questions, especially from residents that might not be able to contact the council by telephone, because at the moment that's the only way that residents can actually get through to the council. I'm very conscious of a couple of the residents I've spoken to who find that really, really difficult accessing the council. So I really appreciate an answer to that question. Thanks again for your indulgence, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Miller. I think we'll go over to Amy, who's waiting to speak, I believe.
Thank you, Chair. Just to answer directly Councillor Miller's question, yes, we are looking at being creative here around opening up the spaces and looking at what proactive support we can actually bring in. So we've got officers obviously that are supporting people every day with frontline issues, and it would be brilliant to have an initiative where we can actually bring some of that support face to face within the community centres to help people. So the answer to the question is yes, we are absolutely looking at that. We do have to look at the staffing of it as well. Like John said, you know, it's not just a case of just opening the community centres up. We need to make sure that the spaces are safe. We need to look at access. We need to make sure that you know, we risk assess all of that as well, all of that stuff that we have to do behind the scenes. So that will be done in order to make sure that we set this up as an arrangement that will be a positive one. So that was that point. And just to say also, although again this is going into the digital thing around, you know, people may or may not like this, but the fact is that the community centres also all have broadband enabled. We've already, as a housing department, put broadband into the community centres for the use of residents on the schemes. If they don't have broadband at home, they can come into the community centres and use it. So that's another excellent tool that we can use in this. So if officers are in supporting residents with claiming benefits, or, you know, looking at things online with them, that can all be done in the community centres together. So that's another real positive, the fact that the community centres are all enabled for that. So the answer to your question is yes, Councillor Miller.
Thank you very much, Amy. That's brilliant. Next, Sue Saunders, please.
Yeah, going back to the town hall, you say it's offices, but it's also a benefits office. And tenants from Exmouth have got to go all the way, well, got to contact Honiton now to deal with their benefits. So it is of use to the tenants of East Devon to have that building open and those benefit offices open. There's an awful lot of tenants on benefits, and now they're having to deal with Honiton. It's just, you know, not a use of a building that used to be well used. So it does need to be looked at again, as far as I'm concerned. And also, I don't think I was being left out with the magazine. I just think that the people who organised it weren't aware that there was an editorial group, but they know now. Okay.
Thank you, Sue. I have two more speakers left, and then we're going to move over to the recommendations. So I have Rob Robinson, please. You're on mute, Rob, still.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm very well. I've heard Exmouth used quite a lot, but I think we've got to look at East Devon as a broader picture. And I feel, because I mean, I'm in Axminster and we're still having the same sort of issues. You know, there's a lot of people here who are seeking, you know, warmer places, especially coming up. I do feel there's a lot of organisations who are running in Axminster who are doing the best that they possibly could do. But I think it's about looking at the bigger picture about what's happening in East Devon, you know, so these smaller communities where transport is it's terrible as well for people to get to other places, and seeing what we can do in our smaller communities, because obviously Axminster is a tiny little place, but we still have the same issues.
Thank you very much, Rob. Yeah, completely. It's about keeping everybody in East Devon involved, isn't it, in their areas as well. So yeah, next we move over to Steve, please.
Thank you so much. As you know, some of you might know that I run the stroke club here in Exmouth, and what we want to do, we want to expand our times and even have further days at the community centre. But the trouble is that you know, it's the money that's it's all about. It's all about the money, and when we're going through all these, when these warm places come up, you know, we want to kind of like at Bidmead, we want to use Bidmead as a central point for Little and Exmouth alone. But the trouble is, we want to open this space so we bring people in, keep them warm, we're looking at kind of like getting computers in, laptops in, and people looking for jobs, support, benefits support. This is what we're trying to do at this moment in time. And this is why I keep on kind of like asking for help all the time. And, you know, we seem to be kind of like not being listened to. So please, you know, it's now, not tomorrow, it's now, it's today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve. Fantastic discussions on a really, really important subject at the moment for everybody in all areas of East Devon. So thank you very much to everybody who's contributed and the report that's come forward. So we've got, I believe, 3 recommendations that we need to take from this, and I'll go over to Giles to bring them forward, if that's okay, please.
Chair, there are 3 recommendations, and you can take them individually or you can take them as a whole. I think most people support all 3 from the sounds of the discussion, and those recommendations are that the Housing Review Board recommend to Cabinet and Council the approval of a budget of £50,000 to allocate towards delivering this project and to designate as a Housing Winter Pressures Hardship Fund. Second recommendation, to give delegated authority to the Strategic Lead Housing, Health Environment and the Housing Service Lead to approve the detail and criteria of the Hardship Fund and the grounds on which funds will be allocated to households. And thirdly, to approve the other actions highlighted within the report that will deliver housing's contribution to the EDDC Winter Pressures Plan.
Lovely.
Okay, please
Sarah, yeah?
Yes, thank you, Chair. If everyone could please use their green ticks and red crosses to vote, with your electronic hand to abstain. We have 7 green ticks in favour, Chair.
That's fantastic. Brilliant. Thank you very much, everyone. Moving on now, we move on to agenda item 12, which is the housing...
Chair, can I just sort of interrupt you? We have been going for 2 hours now. I just wonder whether people want a 5-minute comfort stop. We don't seem to take a breath. Is that would the meeting be happy with that?
Yep, absolutely, if everybody's happy with that. So at the moment it's just coming up to 12:20. Shall we say we reconvene at 12:30? I don't believe we've got a lot more to do after that. So yeah, if everyone's happy with that, come back at 12:30.
I'll pop everyone on mute. If you could please all just make sure that you stay muted, because the live streaming will continue. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, Chair.
Okay, Giles, yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Good afternoon and welcome back to the Housing Review Board meeting. We're moving on now to agenda item 12, Housing Finance Report. And this is to receive a report from Rob Ward, the accountant, please.
Thank you, Chair. Unfortunately, Rob Ward is away at the moment. So I'm Simon Davey, strategically for finance, so I'll fill in for him. The report's in two parts. One is the standard report, which I'm sure the board are used to in terms of this is a financial update to the end of July. So it's looking at where our budgets are, expenditure up to July, and then predicting that forward to the end of the year for you to make sure we're all on track and the housing revenue account is in line with what you expect. The second part of your report looks at the consultation paper that was issued on the social rent cap. So I'll cover it off in those two parts, if that's okay, Chair. The first part, as I said, hopefully these reports look familiar to you. Luckily, Rob did the work before he went away, so I'm just reporting on it and happy to take any questions if I can answer them. But the position you set for the year for the housing revenue account budget was a surplus. You were looking to produce a surplus of 208,000. To that, it looks like we're adding another 579,000 to that position, so favourable position, giving you an increase in your balance at year end to 787,000. What's being highlighted in the report, there are a few risks around that. So although that looks a favourable position at this point in time, there are a few additional costs or risks that need to bear in mind in terms of nothing additional has been allocated as yet regarding this year's pay award to staff. So an estimate was made within your budget of a 2% increase. That looks like it will be significantly above that based on offers made by the employer's side to the various unions. Those are being debated and voted upon at the moment by the unions. So it's likely that the pay award will go over, so that 787,000 that's being predicted is likely to come down. Best guessed at this moment, I'm assuming between 200,000 to 300,000 additional costs, but those numbers will come to you as we know the final position. And also what's being highlighted in the report is the risks over income. So currently good collection rates, good payments in terms of rentals, but there's always that risk, especially over the other topics you discussed on your agenda regarding sort of the cost pressures on tenants, etc. But at the moment, income is holding up and the variation against budget is very low. There are a number of inflationary pressures, but those will be reflected when you set your 23-24 budget. And again, we'll bring back details to you on that. There are appendices which highlight some of the variations against budget, but overall it's a favourable position. I note there is some additional work to be done where we have some underspends. Working with the finance team and your housing team, it looks like there's some different allocations that need to be made between budget heads, which may sort of smooth out some of those variations, but that work is ongoing at the moment. So that's your financial position up to the end of July. Nothing for you to worry about in respect of overspends and the health of your housing revenue account balance. In terms of the second part of the report, it's in connection with the consultation paper with the rent cap. I've included some basic information in there, and I note on the agenda that one of the tables actually hasn't reproduced on your agenda pack. But in 4.4 of the report, this information came from your rental team in terms of the implications of applying CPI plus 1%, which would be our normal practice. We don't know what September CPI is as yet. But based on August CPI, you'd be looking at an increase of 10.8%, significant increase in rental levels. The CAP consultation paper, which Yusuf will go through in a bit more detail in a moment and highlight some issues that I think came out from the workshops that have been held. But in terms of the financial position, comparing against that 10.8%, if it was just a 3% cap applied instead of the full percentage, that would be a reduction in income to the housing revenue account of nearly 1.5 million for that 1 year. And remember, if you don't increase your rent to that level in that year, your following years are affected as well as you apply annual increases going forward. Then if it's a 5% cap, then you lose just over £1 million. And then if it's a 7% cap, then it's the 717,000. So there are implications there. But I think tenants are quite alive to the implications in terms of what that may mean to housing and housing stock in terms of repairs and maintenance, but also the balancing that up against the implications of significantly high rents as well. So happy to take any questions, or if not, Chair, hand over to Yusuf, who I think wants to add on the rent cap.
Lovely, thank you very much, Simon. Do we have any? I don't have any hands up at this stage, so I can go over to Yusuf if you want.
Thank you, Chair. So the consultation commenced on the 31st of August and it closes tomorrow. So if we were to feedback, we would need to feedback by the end of tomorrow. As Simon outlined, under the current policy, the rent is CPI plus 1%, which would mean quite a big increase of about 11% from April 23 onwards. And the draft direction from them, what they're assuming is about 5%, but they're consulting on whether what we think about 3%, 5% and 7%, and asking for views from the whole of the sector. Simon talks about in his report that we haven't undertaken scenario testing under each option, and this is something we'll do going forward and look at the costs at a later date. And he's also talked about how much extra income the different percentages would generate, and a key point is that the income would be lost year on year. It's not just for the April 23 onwards year. It would impact the following years after that and carry on in that way. It's also obviously important to know the implications on tenants' affordability need to be considered. The cost of maintaining the stock increases in inflation, and the ability to meet the current plans to maintain and improve the stock to tackle health and safety issues, the impact on development plans. So if you've got development plans in place, is it going to impact that? Impact on our loans and debt repayment. And what the regulator has pointed out is that landlords will still have the ability to increase rents up to the ceiling that they agree, but they can also set a lower increase or freeze or reduce rents. So that's something that each landlord decision that they can make. So we carried out some consultation with involved and not involved tenants, and they looked at the information within the report, and what they said was that they didn't have an answer in relation to the question on the rent cap, as they didn't feel that they were provided with enough information to be able to make an informed decision. In terms of the kind of information they would need, they wanted to know how much money would it take, how much increase would it take to continue to provide the current levels of service, because they didn't want the current level of service to deteriorate. They understand the costs have gone up, staffing costs have gone up, inflation has meant a number of other areas are costing more, and they wanted to know, what level of increase would sustain the current level of service, and they didn't have that information. They wanted to know about what impact it would have, the different levels of increase on our ability to deliver major cyclical and planned works, and what kind of increases we'd need to deliver those. So are they still going to get kitchens, windows, bathrooms, other works that are planned, or will we not be able to afford them? And then they also wanted to know around health and safety, where there's works that we're required to do by legislation or because they're high risk in terms of health and safety that we have to do. Does that mean to say that we've got no choice and we do need to increase the rent by X percent? They would have also liked to look at what other providers in Devon charge. So they wanted some comparison in terms of how do we compare with others, and what's the impact on residents in terms of the residents that claim full or partial benefits. What would be the impact on them, and how many are affected? And then finally, they felt that the management of the repairs and contract management could be greatly improved, and that would in itself lead to some additional funding without impacting the rent levels. So, you know, in summary, they felt they couldn't decide because they didn't have the information presented to them, and they couldn't answer the questions. As part of the consultation, there are 5 questions that they're asking us to answer, if we possibly can, if we want to feedback. And the first one is around, do we agree that the maximum social rent increase from next year should be subject to a ceiling? So should it be capped? And where should it be capped at? And if it wasn't capped, what was our intention in terms of how much were we going to increase our rent anyway if we didn't impose a ceiling, if they didn't impose it? So that's one question. The second question they wanted us to answer was, do you agree with imposing a ceiling of 5%, or would you prefer the other percentages, which were 3%, 7%? And have you got any evidence on what are the potential impacts of the different options? So this is what Tenants said as well. They wanted to know the impact, but they didn't have that in front of them. And then the third question, they wanted to know whether we agree that the ceiling should only apply for 23-24 year, or do you think it should apply for 2 years? So should the cap apply for 1 year or 2? And question 4 was whether we agreed that it should only apply to existing tenants and not to affordable rent properties, first let and re-let properties. Should it be only for the existing tenants? And then finally, they wanted to know whether we felt there should be any exceptions to the cap. So the number of questions, I appreciate we haven't got the information within the report. That's the conclusion the tenants came back with. I think we're very limited to how we can respond to the regulator on this, because we've not presented, I think, the Housing Review Board with that information, or not been in a position to, or the tenants. So obviously I'll hand over to you guys and see, invite your comments, views, and thoughts.
Thank you very much. Now moving over to questions. First of all, I have Steve, who has his hand up, please.
I just don't understand it. Why the 5% increase while we're having so much difficulty, while we're coming into a property status, because everybody is struggling, and rents, if you're putting rents up, how is it going to be the affordability? And tenants will be kind of like worried that they won't even have a home to live in because of the increase that you're making.
Thank you very much, Steve. I don't have any more speakers on my list to speak. So I believe this report, Giles will correct me if I'm wrong, is just to be noted going forward.
That's correct, Chair.
Thank you very much, Giles. So we will now move on to agenda item 13, which is the self-assessment against the Ombudsman Code of Conduct complaints. And this is to receive a report from Amy, Housing Service Lead, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So we've touched upon complaints already a few times today. So perhaps we'll revisit some of those questions after I just take you through this report, the main parts of this report. So firstly, to point out that this report is about governance, and it's about how we are ensuring that we comply with the Ombudsman's Code of Conduct, which is something that we have to as part of our regulation standards. So changes have recently been made to the Ombudsman's Code of Conduct, and what this is set out before you here is a self-assessment that we've done to make sure that we comply with that. So we have attached the whole checklist as part of this report so that you can look in detail at each section. We are required to do this self-assessment annually, and we have to be able to satisfy you as our governing board that we are currently compliant. So it's a procedural move today, just to make sure that you are happy with this and that we can adopt this moving forward. So there's one area that we're flagging that we've highlighted, which comes under section 2.3 of the report, and that's where there's an ombudsman requirement to respond to complainants within 10 working days. And in exceptional circumstances, they then allow a further 10 days on top of that. Our current procedure actually states a response within 20 working days, and that's consistent with how we deal with all complaints across East Devon, because our corporate complaints team deal with all the housing complaints like they do all the other complaints across the council. So during one of our webinar sessions that we went to that was held directly with the Ombudsman, interestingly, this was a point queried by many local authorities, because where we have a corporate complaints procedure that suggests 20 working days, what local authorities are saying is that although it says we have to comply on 10, if our corporate position is 20, is that okay? And what the Ombudsman is saying in that scenario is, yes, it is okay, as long as you can evidence that your corporate policy clearly states 20 working days. They will accept that. So we've put the details of that under the checklist, because that's the only area that we've highlighted that would suggest that we don't meet the code as it's set out. So we're required to publish the results of this self-assessment exercise online. That's another requirement that has recently been brought in by the Ombudsman in order to ensure transparency. So once this has been approved today, we will ensure that that's uploaded onto our website. The report in the final section also highlights some very recent changes that have been announced in relation to the escalation of complaints to the Ombudsman. So previously this was known as the democratic filter, which existed whereby a period of time had to wait until a formal complaint could be escalated to the Ombudsman if the complainant was still unhappy with the response from us. So there was two ways it could go. They'd either have to wait 8 weeks since we closed the complaint, wait 8 weeks, and then they could raise their complaint with the Ombudsman, or they'd have to send it through a designated panel. So there was a series of, we called them designated persons. And again, if the complainant was unhappy with the response, and this is all set out in our stage 2 response to tenants, they could direct the complaint back to a designated person for a further review. And the Ombudsman said that we had to do one of these two things before the complaint could actually then be raised with the Ombudsman. So this has now been taken away completely. It's called a democratic filter. This is now not going to exist. So what that basically means is that when a tenant gets to the end of our stage 2 process, if they remain unhappy with our response, they will then be able to immediately escalate the complaint to the Ombudsman. The Ombudsman have recognised the increased number of referrals that that's going to lead to, and they're gearing up accordingly. I was reading some statistics this morning on the website, which I think they're doubling their staff over the next few months in order to be ready for what they think is going to be, high demand on their service. So, final points just to summarise. So we need to be aware of this from the perspective of how much quicker complaints will end up with the Ombudsman. But obviously, in the first instance, for me, this is about ensuring we're not in a situation where any complaints end up at stage 2 and then seemingly going on to the Ombudsman. But on occasions, obviously, they will end up there. What we need to do is make sure that we have good quality, sufficient responses going out at stage 1 and 2, and where we're making every effort that we can to satisfy tenants around whatever their reason is for raising those complaints. So that, in essence, is what this paper is about, Chair. It's just a self-assessment exercise. So I'd be interested to know, to get any comments from the board in relation to the actual self-assessment document that we've attached as an appendix to this report, just to check that that's clear and that people understand what we're saying that. So perhaps that's maybe the first place to start with this, and then we can move on to some of the other comments from earlier.
Lovely, thank you ever so much, Amy, that's brilliant. So if we move over to questions, first of all I have Councillor Miller, please.
Thank you, Chair. I didn't think I'd be able to be at this part of the meeting, but thankfully I am, and I've had a word with Amy briefly before this part, but I thought I'd made my comments to the meeting as a whole as I'm here, which is just to, well, first of all, I think it's welcome from a councillor perspective. I was one of the designated persons referring complaints to the Ombudsman, and I think it was a complex system which I feel that residents didn't necessarily completely understand. I think the 8-week wait after a stage 2 could be very frustrating for residents. I don't think the system works. So I think the new system is going to simplify things for tenants and hopefully incentivise the council to try to resolve complaints quicker. And as Amy said, hopefully it'll prevent more complaints coming in the first place. And just a point, so on the document attached, which Amy referred to, 7.3 on best practice should requirements. And that is on that there should be a member of the governing body should be appointed to have a lead responsibility for complaints to support a positive complaint handling culture. The role will be responsible for ensuring the governing body receives regular information on complaints that provides insight to the governing body on the landlord's complaint handling performance. So where it says who that should be designated to, it refers to designated members for complaints. Of course, we don't exist anymore as of the 1st of October. So I think the board needs to think about which member of the authority or members that should take overall responsibility for overseeing how our council responds to complaints. And if you look at our constitution and the delegated authority of the portfolio holders, the portfolio holder for democracy and transparency is the one who has one of her responsibilities is freedom of information. So I think it would sit quite neatly with her. But I think there's a lot of discretion, and I think it's for the board. And certainly I think it's the tenants on the board to decide which member they feel should be monitoring how the council deals with complaints, to sort of provide a bit of democratic oversight, really. So that's my only comment in terms of the in terms of the self-assessment form and the report itself. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Miller. Moving over to Sue Saunders, please.
Yeah, well, as you can imagine, I've got quite a few just complaints about this self-assessment. There are areas that they say they comply, and quite honestly, if you listen to the tenants, there is no compliance with it. But I go back again to this pre-stage 1 filtering system. It is undemocratic and it interferes with the tenant's democratic right to put in a complaint. If they're going to put a complaint in, then it's going to be filtered and taken out and reclassified as a repairs request. And also, if this is only applying to tenants of East Devon District Council and not residents of East Devon District Council, it is discriminatory if this part of the proceedings is just for tenants. It discriminates against tenants. And it is not fair. This 20 days business, I mean, the tenants get so fed up waiting to hear whether or not just to have an acknowledgement to say that their complaints have been received. I mean, sometimes they never get an acknowledgement. It's just left in the air. So that is not, I mean, that's got to be looked at. I just feel the whole system needs looking at again from a tenant's point of view, not from a member's, not from staff's point of view. You complain about the amount of complaints you get. I mean, compared with other authorities, etc., you get off very light. I mean, I talked to a tenant once, and they get £300 complaints, you know, within the space of a couple of months. How many do we get? Next to none. And when you look at Ian Williams, their record with regard to feedback, they've got no feedback. So tenants can't complain directly to Ian Williams. They have to go through the formal complaint system. And then if they go there and then they're recategorized as a repair request, they've lost all, it's an absolute bloody shambles. And sorry, swearing, don't mean to, but that first filtering section should be scrapped altogether. It's totally anti-tenant, and I won't have it. I can't support this. I cannot support it. It's totally uncalled for.
Thank you, Sue. Oh, I don't have any more hands up to speak. Nobody else to speak? Oh, no, we have Amy. There we go. Amy, next, please.
So, yeah, just to pick up on a few of the points that Sue's made. Firstly, if we just go back to the start of the meeting, Sue, when you obviously what you raised in public speaking, I note your comments in relation to the report that I think you said was I think it was April 21. And I've had a look back at that in terms of what was presented to the board, and I think perhaps in hindsight some of the language we used there wasn't quite correct. We called it a policy. Well, it wasn't really a policy. It was more of a procedural document that we were setting out. So I think you're right to raise that, and I think we need to look back and just understand where that sits in line with our corporate complaints. The thing here for me, often with complaints, it's about language. So there's lots of sort of terms here around complaints, service request. Ultimately, any dissatisfaction in the service is not good. And what we want to try and always do is close it down and resolve it as quickly as we can. What I see us failing on too many times over and over again is a lack of communication around complaints. So my experience is that even if somebody is not very happy with a situation that they're in, or they're not very happy with us about something that we've done, quite often communication, as long as there is communication in place around making sure people understand where their complaint is at, what we're doing about it, what we perceive the timescales to be, what are some of perhaps the reasons why we're not able to resolve it quickly or instantly for them. As long as people receive that information, then quite often, although I'm not saying it's still acceptable, people they understand that. They understand that sometimes these things can be complex. But what we're failing to do, in my opinion, in far too many cases, is communicate with people so they know where they're at and they know where some of these things sit. So, as we said at the beginning, we've recognised that we need to look at complaints with some fresh eyes in relation to some of the new guidance that's being brought in under the Act. Complaints from my perspective, complaints tells us everything that's going wrong with our service. So we have to study complaints to understand what's going wrong. They tell us that they're full of information about potentially what's going wrong. So that exercise we have to do. And that's why that's on the full plan, so we can refresh it. We can look at exactly the points that you're raising, Sue. And what we will bring forward, I hope, is a proposal that will satisfy the board in terms of how we will deal with complaints, but particularly around some of those layers of communication, what we tell residents and when. That's so important. And I've seen evidence of complaints that have gone from stage 1 to stage 2, and literally the only reason they've gone to stage 2 is because we've not communicated properly about the outcome of stage 1. That's completely unacceptable, and I hold myself and officers highly accountable for that. And we will, as I say, we look at complaints carefully, and they will help us to understand what's going wrong with the service and what we can do to put things right in the future. So I suppose I'm not not able to sort of, you know, give all the answers, but what I'm committing to is that we refresh this, and we absolutely need and we welcome, you know, that expertise that tenants can give us on their experiences of having gone through the complaint process themselves. We use that to build a better system going forward. Sorry, I've ranted a bit there, Chair.
That's all right. Thank you very much, Amy. I think you know, it's key to get it out there and get it right going forward, so everybody's happy. So yeah, I'm now going to go over to, I've got Councillor Paul Miller next.
Thanks for letting me back, Chair. Appreciating I'm not a voting member of the board. I really appreciate what Amy's just said now. It's really good to be transparent, I think, about, you know, where the council could do better, because I think actually the council does do quite a good job. I think, as Sue referred to, there are relatively fewer complaints at East Devon Council compared with a lot of councils in the country. As well as, you know, just drawing on my experience as designated person, which I did for nearly over 2 years, I will have referred about half a dozen, maybe more, complaints to the Ombudsman. And of the complaints that were upheld, the pattern, as well as communication, as Amy refers to, the pattern I identified was with regard to the council's record keeping procedures, and there were 2 maladministration cases that were obviously emailed to me in my capacity of designated person at the time, which highlighted the council's need really to review its record keeping policy, and just in terms of keeping, because I believe a good record keeping procedure is kind of at the heart of being able to communicate to residents in the first place, just keeping notes of every single visit to a tenant and making sure in every case there's a detailed audit trail of what's gone on, particularly given with our repairs contractor, the council's working in partnership with Ian Williams, for example. So I would be very grateful, respecting the fact that we're 3 hours into a meeting, if Amy could give a quick update on whether the council has done anything since those judgments on looking to review its record keeping policies, and whether they're looking to improve those, because I think that's key, as well as communication. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Miller. Next I have Sue Saunders. Sue, you're on mute still.
Technology. You say you learn from complaints. How come it took the tenants to wake you up to the absolute abysmal service we were getting from Ian Williams? It was tenants who brought the information to you. You didn't learn it from the tenants' complaints. It was us that told you. You're not listening to the tenants when they put in complaints. All you're doing is reducing the amount of complaints to make it look better. And how now they're going to get rid of the designated tenant panel and the designated councillors. How are tenants going to be helped when they are making a complaint? There's tenants out there who would not have a clue how to put in a complaint. How do they get the assistance they need to put in a complaint that is acceptable, if you know what I mean, in acceptable terms? There's nothing to help them now. So it needs the whole thing, I've said before, the whole system needs looking at from scratch again. I'm sorry if I get irate, but this really makes me cross. I've dealt with so many people who've tried to go through the complaint system and come out the other end. I mean, I've got people having nervous breakdowns, panic attacks. They've been accused of aggression. They've been accused of being persistent complainers, all because they're not being listened to by the complaint system. We see the other side of this. They might think they're doing well, but the tenants don't. And we've got to get this sorted out once and for all. It might comply with some of what the code is of the Ombudsman, but a lot of it doesn't comply. Not if you're honest with us. No, it's all very well, but sorry, I'm rambling. I'm ranting and I'm sorry. It's because I'm angry. I'll shut up now.
Thank you, Sue. I don't know, Amy, did you want to come back?
Yeah, Chair, I'll come back. So just firstly, I think Councillor Miller raised some questions. So absolutely agree, communication and record keeping were the two takeaways that we took from all of those maladministration complaints. So we have been working with frontline teams around record keeping. I wouldn't say we're there yet, but I would say that it's certainly on the manager's agenda in terms of the need to make sure that they are auditing cases, that they're spot checking cases, and where we do have complaints that come through and we look back and we see that we have had issues around record keeping, that those individual cases are raised with the officers so that they understand what was missing, and we look to make sure that you know we're better at putting that in place. So I absolutely agree, it is a key area of concern for us, and work is ongoing to make sure that we're constantly monitoring that, and we have to get better at doing it. And I was recently at the Chartered Institute of Housing conference, and I went along to a session by the Ombudsman on record keeping, that exact subject, and about the number of issues they have with social landlords around record keeping and some of the challenges, and some really good sort of ideas as well to help with that, because I'm not saying it makes it okay, but we're certainly not alone in terms of the issue around record keeping with some of this. So hopefully that answers Councillor Miller's question. Secondly, just to pick up on some of the points that Sue made there. So we can still, so obviously this is what we have to do to comply with the Ombudsman's Code of Conduct. We can still have whatever processes we want in place here at East Devon to complement that. So for example, as part of the resident involvement strategy, what we talked about earlier, if complaints is one area that tenants feel very strongly about, then we could still keep our tenant complaint panel as a subgroup that we've got. Obviously, that's all up for review now as part of a resident involvement strategy. But if it's still something that's very important to residents so that they can go through the scrutiny of complaints, because obviously that's a group of residents that go through complaints in some detail, we can still keep measures like that in place if that's a real desire for tenants and they feel that that's something that's very important to them. There's no reason why we can't keep that in place. In relation to the issues referred to around Ian Williams, what I would say is that we did listen. You know, part of Sue and I have had many discussions around this, and we've had many meetings over the course of this year about it. There were other indicators as well that were indicating problems around the contract, and that's why we've put the action plan in place, and that's why we're working through some of that at the moment. But we have listened to residents, and that's part of the reason why we are you know, really focusing on some of those improvements that need to be made with the contract. And obviously, as I say, Sue and I have had a lot of discussions on that. The point around making sure that people are aware, it's really important. I absolutely agree with making sure that people know how to complain. That's really important. We put it everywhere that we can. So we often put it on leaflets, on publications. Appreciate, you know, obviously it is on the website. I know, Sue, you're not gonna like that I say that, but obviously it is there. But we also try and communicate wherever we can. We've got notices in community centres. The staff are also, you know, briefed. They understand what they need to make sure that they're directing tenants in that direction as well. So we do what we can to get the message out there. But you know, and we need to continue. We need to continue to do that. So I think that's possibly answered some of Sue's
Come back
points.
on one point. I'm not concerned with tenants knowing how to complain. It's how they write the actual complaint. So, I mean, some people are dyslexic. Some people have low learning difficulties. They don't know how to compose a complaint. They need help with that initial complaint to actually write it so that it is legible and covers the points they need to cover. I mean, if they're left to themselves, they're just going to flounder. This is what worries me. And they're the very people that need the help. So there needs to be something in place to help them write those complaints. Sorry, I'll get off the phone in a minute. I get agitated.
Thank you very much, Sue, and thank you,
Right.
Amy, for coming back. So this is also just noted, but the recommendation is that HRB note that the council have undertaken an assessment of the corporate complaints procedure against the Housing Ombudsman's Complaint Handling Code of Practice, and that the review of the procedure for handling housing service complaints is planned with the tenant involvement. So that report is noted. Thank you very much. And we'll now move on to agenda item 14, which is the tenant satisfaction measures. To receive a report from Amy. You're up again, Amy. Housing service lead, please.
Thank you, Chair. So we've been awaiting the publication of these measures, and they arrived right at the end of September. So as I said at the beginning, this was one of the reports that I snuck onto your agenda today because it seemed like a good opportunity. So this is a new set of measures that's come in as a result of the consultation paper from the regulator that was run back at the beginning of the year, and we brought that to you, I understand, at that point, so you were aware of that consultation exercise. So we knew this was coming, so no surprises, and it doesn't look like they've made many changes to what was originally suggested as part of that consultation paper. This, in essence, is more preparation that we are seeing from the regulator with regards to the changes being brought in with the Social Housing Act. So it's about being much more transparent, much more robust approach to collecting data from all social landlords, not just housing associations. Quite often in the past, housing associations have been subject to have to return on some of this data. We haven't. This is bringing the whole sector in line, so including us as a local authority stockholding organisation. So there's two parts to this. The first part is about collection of data in relation to how satisfied tenants are with the service that they receive from us. And you can see in 2.3, the table 2 there, the confirmed list of measures that we will now be required to collect. Part of the reasoning around this is that the regulator wants to give tenants the opportunity to compare the performance of their landlords to others. And we talked at our last meeting about proposals for a tenant satisfaction survey, and pleasingly you approved that. So we are about to run that. Usefully, the timing on this now means that we can tweak it to make sure that we capture all the information that we need to comply with this. The second part relates to a set of management indicators that we will also be required to submit on an annual basis. You can see the list of them in section 2.5 under table 2. And what we can see here for the first time is that there is a requirement for us to submit a series of measures that relates to compliance. So this is building compliance ultimately. We have been expecting this for some time, and reassuringly, most of the information we already collect in this format to satisfy our own compliance requirements. I say most as there is a bit of work underway now just to make sure that we can collect that data in the correct format in terms of what we have to submit. So our data teams are busy reviewing that at the moment. So as well as reporting these measures to the regulator, we're required to provide this information in an annual report to tenants. And again, this is part of what's set out in this paper. This is something that we've always done anyway in terms of producing an annual report, but we'll need to tweak the content and format just to ensure that we capture the information we're being required to produce. And we suggest that we do this in consultation with our tenant involvement management group to produce a template that everybody is happy with. Most importantly, tenants, as obviously this report, the annual report to tenants, is about making sure that we are informing tenants of the information that they want to receive from us. So important we get that sign off from them. So fairly straightforward, Chair, this one. Happy to take any questions.
Still on mute, sorry. Thank you, Amy. So questions, who have we got? We've got Sue Saunders up first, please.
Sorry, I will shut up in a minute. There's just one thing I want to say. Bottom of page 2.3, the final sentence, it says the detail of the questions required can be found ... The pertinent word here is questions. Could you ensure that the question really are questions and not statements? I.e., A question begins with words like do you, have you, can you, will you, would you. Questions are able to be answered yes or no without any fear of ambiguity. If you put a statement, people don't know how to answer them. I have not got a garden, yes or no. You know, do you answer yes, I have not got a garden? Or do you answer no, I haven't got a garden? No, it's ambiguous. People don't know how to answer. A straightforward question, have you got a garden? And it's yes or no. So please, can we look at how it is worded?
Thank you very much, Sue. Next, I have Yusuf, please.
Thanks, Chair. It was just in response to Sue's feedback. The questions are laid out by the regulator. We're not allowed to change the wording of those questions, unfortunately. So there's some strict guidance on how we do the survey and how the questions are worded. We can include additional questions, but we can't change these questions, Sue. But I can talk to you about that outside of this meeting, if you like.
Thank you very much, Yusuf.
Thank you very much.
So I have no more speakers to speak on this item. So we have recommendations. Number one is that the members note the publication of the new tenant satisfaction measures by the regulator and the requirement for us to ensure compliance of the submission of the data required. But part number two is that members approve a review of the structure and distribution of the annual report in partnership with the Tenant Involvement Management Group with a view to providing a proposed approach at a future housing review board that meets the standard required. So can we go to Sarah for green ticks, red crosses, please, for part two.
Thank you, Chair. So members are voting now. We have 6 green ticks in favour, 7 green ticks in favour, Chair.
That's brilliant. Thank you ever so much, everybody. Moving on, we move on now to agenda item 15, which is the quarterly performance indicator report, quarter 1 for 2022 to 23. To receive and note the quarterly monitoring report, Natalie Brown, Information and Analysis Officer, please.
Chair, if I may, it's Amy.
Amy, yeah.
Yeah, so Natalie's not here.
That's right.
Natalie collates this information and puts it forward for you. So yes, we're happy to take any questions on any part of this. This is obviously what we put forward on each agenda. This is a summary of our quarter 1 performance.
That's lovely, thank you. Do I have any questions from anybody?
Sorry, yeah, hang on.
Are you with us, Sue?
I am, I'm getting there. Yeah, on the lettings on 8.0, page 103, re-voids and what have you, we need a plan of action and a timescale which will show us when we should get back to normal when it comes to voids, because the money being lost with the amount of voids will go a long way towards helping with the cost of what's coming for us with the stock condition and what have you. But the houses need to be rented. They don't need to be sounding empty. So we need a time scale and some sort of action plan to show us how things are going.
Chair,
yeah, of course, Amy.
Yeah, absolutely, Sue. I think if we talked about voids earlier, so we should, when we bring that report forward for you about voids in more detail, I think we need to capture all those points there.
Yeah, that's lovely. Thank you very much, Amy. So I have no more speakers or questions from anybody. So that is just to note on this one. So we'll move on now to agenda item 16. Agenda item 16 is self-assessment against Ombudsman Code of Conduct complaints. And this is to note the letter from the regulator of social housing. if everybody's had a chance to read that in the reports pack.
Sorry, Chair, I think there's a slight error there on your script. So item 16 is communication from regulator of social housing, regulatory context for government announcement on draft legislative clauses.
I haven't got that one.
I think it's in the agenda pack, but I think you're, there's a slight typo on your script. Apologies for that.
Okay, that's all right. So we will go with what Sarah has just said, everybody. It's the easiest way because I haven't got it on my script.
So, Chair, can I just say a few words on this one?
Absolutely, yeah, thank you.
So yeah, so this letter was actually received by us in April, and I think it was an error that it didn't come forward with your pack for reports in June. And it should have done, but I think I'm right in saying that Alethea did circulate this to board members via email as well. So hopefully you have already had a chance to see it. So this is a direct letter to us from the regulator, which basically is setting out the raft of up and coming changes, much of which we've discussed today. And it's in order to focus our mind, if you like, around the need for compliance around some of this new legislation that's coming forward. The regulator is rightly so highlighting the role that we all play in this, including you as a board, in terms of governance and the responsibilities that we all have in this to ensure that we're compliant. So I see this as a bit of a warning shot. It comes off the back of quite a lot of recent bad press that members will probably be aware of nationally in relation to social housing providers. You'd be aware of the ITV campaign that's been running for some time, where they've been naming and shaming a number of large housing providers for poor conditions of property and seemingly tenants not being listened to when issues are raised with their landlords. And as I say, that really chimes with some of the discussion that we've been having here today. So in terms of our preparedness for this, we're putting a significant amount of work into this already, over and over again today in our discussions. We've talked about the social housing white paper, about some of this stuff coming forward. So this is about us all getting ready for that. We've been working on this for, a good 18 months already. We've got the new legislation on the forward plan in terms of the white paper and what's coming. So my suggestion is that we continue to report to you as a board on progress we're making in relation to any of this, but really interested in any comments that the board have got on this. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Amy. Do we have anybody that has any questions around this one that they'd like to raise?
Oh, sorry, wrong way round. Yeah.
Oh, Sue?
Sorry, the last thing I'm going to say. Amy, I would like to invite you to the Resident Involvement Management Group to come and explain the letter to them and what it means to East Devon tenants. So you're cordially invited to the next Resident Involvement Management Group meeting if you are available.
Okay, Chair, thank you. Yeah, lovely, Sue. Thank you very much. I'll make sure it's in my diary.
Well, I don't know when it is yet. So.
Oh, okay.
Thank you very much, Sue. I don't have any other speakers with their hands up to speak. So on my script, that brings our Housing Review Board meeting to an end, and I would like to thank everyone, including the members of the public, for their attendance. Members, can I remind you that until Democratic Services team confirmed that the live streaming and recording has stopped, you can still be seen and heard, and any comments made